Yeah. Living in this time behind enemy lines, so I got mine. I hope ya.
Good morning from the Batcave. It is, I think it's Monday, January 19th, 2026, and I'm going to do another eschatology update for y'all because there's been a lot shaken. For me, not so much, and for those of you guys who have followed these eschatology updates for a while, you understand that once you've really written a book on how you'll understand the book of Revelation come up, if that book is not garbage, when the things happen, those things aren't like, oh, this just in, and all of a sudden it changes, what your viewpoint is. It's more like, here's what happened, and that's a step towards what you've already predicted is going to happen. So most people who write books on eschatology are responding to the headlines rather than responding to the headlines with what Scripture has always said is going to happen. So, again, since I've had this stuff in print since really my first version was 2018, but I republished in 2019 under my own publishing company, I haven't seen anything shocking. I've seen stuff that I didn't necessarily predict. I didn't necessarily plot into my timeline, but I haven't seen anything since 2018, including COVID, that has shifted my eschatological paradigm one bit. Okay? Now, as far as people that I follow in relation to current events and stuff having to do with eschatology, the list is getting short. And the reason is because most eschatology buffs out there, if you will, get stuck in a paradigm, and that paradigm, if it's wrong, is going to skew your perspective on how you understand what's going on as these things start to unfold. If your paradigm is thoroughly biblical, those things are just going to line right up with what you expect to be happening. Even if it's not those exact details, it's not going to throw you off. It's not going to leave you doubtful. It's not going to leave you confused. It's going to lead you going, well, we're heading towards this, so it makes sense that would happen on the way there, okay? But in terms of people that I've followed in the past, again, guys like Chuck Missler, guys like Joel Richardson, Chris White, a lot of these guys, again, maybe I've gained some insight from things they've said. Billy Crone's another one. Chuck Missler, I think I said. John Holler is another one. I don't find much information from them. I don't learn much from them. I might learn some information from them on current events, which is like, it's a source that you can follow because they're reporting on things that are happening here and now. But I haven't learned anything from these guys in terms of informing my eschatology for a decade. So I'm not saying this to brag and say, this is the best eschatology you can find. I'm just saying go get my book of Revelation, and you will have a clearer focus on where things are going, because I don't overstep in predicting things, but I think I incorporate more biblical prophecies than any other eschatology teacher out there. And that includes the Chuck Misslers. That includes the guys you think are the most informed on eschatology. I have learned from those guys in the past, but they don't incorporate a lot of biblical prophecies related to eschatology that they should, and they leave stuff out. They leave hanging threads that don't make sense, and ultimately their full paradigm is broken. And as we get closer and closer and closer to the end, those holes in their paradigm are going to lead to confusion, doubt, and further misinterpretation of the events that are happening, because it doesn't make sense. And where they think it's heading doesn't make sense. And so as we get to a certain point, you're going to find pre-tribbers increasingly reporting on this general trajectory of, transhumanism and one world government, yada, yada, yada. But because they believe we're going to be raptured before any of those things happen, it's not going to make sense in terms of where it's going and when, because a lot of these things line up with Daniel's 70th week. A lot of these things are going to line up with a one world government and World War III coming to pass right up to Daniel's 70th week. So as we get closer and closer to World War III getting full blown, and it ultimately ends with the sun turning to darkness and the moon turning to blood, by that time, all your pre-tribbers should shut up. They should shut up and say, hey, we were wrong. If you have a pre-tribber, once you see the sun turn to darkness and the moon turn to blood, not say we were wrong and start to shift and say, well, apparently the rapture happened and we just missed it. No, they need to go back to the drawing board or two people have said, no, the pre-trib rapture is false, and the doctrine of imminence is a false doctrine of imminence, those people are going to fall away. And they're already starting to show signs of falling away, show signs of doubting the pre-trib rapture, because too much is happening that they suspect it to not happen until the rapture. It's that simple. So you're going to see the pre-wrath guys start to fall away or shift their paradigm once the sun turns to darkness and the moon turns to blood, because these guys have said that's when the rapture happens, when the sun turns to darkness and the moon turns to blood. So they're either going to start to shift and lie and double down on their lies and say, maybe the rapture happened and we just missed it, because there is going to be a lot of chaos in World War III and up to possibly a quarter of the planet dying. So there's a lot of room to say in the signs, oh, that was the rapture and we just weren't a part of it because maybe we're lukewarm or whatever. This is going to be the major deception that comes on the world when the Antichrist comes, which is why Jesus said, don't believe it when they say he's there in the desert, which is the Middle East, or he's there in the inner rooms, which is sitting in the Holy of Holies, okay? He's specifically pointing you to what's going to happen with the Antichrist and claims that it's him, okay? So we're preparing for that. We're preparing for an Antichrist who's going to do things that we expect Christ to do in pouring out his wrath in his second coming, something similar. What we're also preparing for because of that is somebody like an Antichrist who deceives the world into thinking maybe the Antichrist has come and gone, and this new guy who seems to be taking over the Middle East now might be Christ setting up his millennial kingdom, okay? So that's the big deception we're going for, and this is where, like, for instance, John Brisson and I, we are good friends, okay? We talk regularly, but where we've kind of always watched from the opposite side of the line on this point is Donald Trump. Could he be that? Could he be the Antichrist? I will hold to the possibility that he could be. Before I would say no, and I've shifted more because of the things he's done to the possibility that he could be. John also has shifted towards the view that there's a possibility that he is this fake Antichrist that's going to lead to the real Antichrist lining up. Now, I still am way more in that camp, but you always have to, especially when you're dealing with current events and predictive stuff, you always have to leave open the possibility that you're wrong, okay? Unless the word says it, there's always the possibility that we're wrong. If it's interpretive, if it's theoretical, and so you have to have that humility and have to go forward. Otherwise, you're going to get locked into what you're trying to skew the data towards because you're so sure that you're right. You want the data to conform it, and you get to confirmation bias. And so again, John and I regularly talk in the background. We bounce off each other. We also talk regularly on podcasts on his channel as to what we're seeing happening. So that's how it should be among Christians. Again, we should know what the word says, and then we should be watching for the signs that are going on around us while still remaining fixated on sharing the gospel with people. Because again, that's God's heart. That's our mission. But we also watch for the signs, okay? That's just being faithful. As we get into the Matthew teaching that I'm doing in my other video series, we're going to show you how Christ, again, from the moment he points to his death and resurrection in the gospel, he also starts pointing to signs of his second coming and informing the disciples so that they're aware of signs of his second coming. So there was never a time where people were supposed to be about the gospel but not thinking about the second coming. You won't find that. This is why we're going to show you in the Didache, where it's like one of the first evangelical documents they point to the signs of the second coming. We're going to show you 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, where Paul is teaching brand new believers for the first time and informing them about signs of the second coming, okay? There was never a point in church history where the faithful church was not mindful of the signs of Christ's second coming, okay? The fact that we have a church that's largely ignorant and willfully ignorant of the signs of Christ's second coming says we're in the last days. And that's what 2 Peter reported to us, that they would be willfully ignorant of the flood and the signs of his second coming. So we see that, okay? That is a sign of the times that we're also looking for alongside the great apostasy and the things that lead up to the Antichrist, okay? So with that being said, I'm going to continually bring forward my position on eschatology. I'm going to advise you guys to get my book if you don't have a copy of it. If you've been following this channel for a while and you care about eschatology at all, you should have a copy of my book. It's not that expensive. If you're a $10 subscriber on my channel for 1 month, you can get it for free. It's $30 if you get it on Amazon. Okay, it will tie in all the prophecies together. Yes, you can find this content in my videos if you watch 1,000 hours of content, or you could read the whole book in 6 hours and just have it succinctly packaged for you. You should know how to read and not just get your doctrine and your ideas from YouTube just through hearing. You should know how to read and fact check and check with the scriptures, okay? So I made the book as a tool so that you could succinctly go through these things, but it keeps pointing to the scriptures that you should be getting increasingly informed on, especially if you want to lead and teach others and advise other people as to the signs of Christ coming as we get closer to that day, okay? This is not for your entertainment. This is for you to be useful servants to Christ and also doing these things as well. This is why I'm making these tools. All my books are meant to be tools used by people who want to lead other people to Christ and in discipleship, okay? So, with that being said, understand that I hold to the 7 seals leading up to Daniel's 70th week, okay? This is where I differ from the pre-trib camp and from the pre-wrath camp. The 7 seals lead up to Daniel's 70th week. I would challenge these guys, and I would ask you to challenge them. What is your biblical evidence that the 7 seals have to be in Daniel's 70th week? Okay? Your pre-tribbers are going to try to cram them into the first half along with the trumpets, which is just a ton of stuff to fit in 3.5 years. And it's actually about 3 years and a couple of months if you get it down to 360-day periods. The pre-wrath guys are going to stretch it out over Daniel's 70th week and then put the trumpets and the bowls at the very end and just cram those in as little space as they can. Okay, and that makes no sense either. Okay? I have the easiest paradigm to remember. You have the 6 seals leading up to Daniel's 70th week. You have the trumpets in the first half. You have the bowls in the second half. It's the easiest paradigm to remember. It's really easy to go through the book of Revelation that way. And if you get the book and if you watch my videos on the subject, I make it very clear that when the sun turns to darkness and the moon turns to blood, that is the end of the Gog-Magog war. The whole earth is shaking. All you need to do is put Joel 2 and Ezekiel 38 and 39 together and understand they're both talking about the Gog-Magog war, and that leads you right into Daniel's 70th week. There's a 7-year period reported on Ezekiel right after that. There's a division of the land reported by Joel right after that, and then that leads into the Battle of Armageddon per Joel, so we don't need to know that the Battle of Armageddon is not in Ezekiel because it's in Zechariah. It's in Joel, it's in Zechariah, it's alluded to in Micah 5, it's obviously in the book of Revelation where you see the red horse, that's the Gog-Magog war, and then you see Armageddon, that's the second. So there's 2 wars. There's 2 Armageddon-like wars. One leads to the presentation of the Antichrist, and the other leads to the presentation of the true Christ, okay? Now, this shouldn't be shocking because there's a massive war surrounding Israel leading up into Joshua conquering the land, followed by a division of the land. There's a war leading up to Christ conquering the land, followed by a division of the land. So there's going to be a war surrounding Israel with Antichrist coming into the land, dividing the land. You see the same pattern happening. And why? The one with the authority to divide the land is who? Who made the division of the land? Whose land is it? And the Lord says, it's my land. And the Lord, when they cast lots to divide the land, the Lord was the one who was sovereign over the division of the land. And it was sacred to him that those who he divided the land to gave it back to the people of their inheritance after the period. They could loan out the land, but they couldn't sell the land permanently, okay? It was theirs permanently. And so when you see the land divided to the 12 tribes, it was theirs permanently, and they were not to sell it. They were not to sell it permanently to one another. It was to remain within their divisions. And because of the division of the land, which was ordained by God, he is going to enter into the judgment of the nations because the nations had no authority to divide the land. So what you're going to see here is a division of the land by the Antichrist with the support of the world's nations. You have to have these things. Again, this is in Joel 3. And this is in, let's see, I think it's in Daniel 8. Oh, Daniel 11, I'm sorry. It says, he shall do in the most strongholds with a strange God. I believe that to be AI, who he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and it shall cause them to rule over many. I believe that them is going to be the image of the beast and ultimately Satan. and then divide the land for gain. So divide the land for gain. Now, there are people who I support in terms of their overall teaching that might be, I would consider a sound brother in Christ in relation to some things, but they need to hear this. The actual division of the physical land of Israel is an eschatological sign. Okay? It's not one place, it's two places. So we see this. This is something that the Antichrist will do. Okay? And it talks about this stuff that he does is going to lead into Michael standing up and the resurrection of the dead. Okay? It also leads to the abomination of desolation. This is all one prophecy. And Jesus Christ himself tells us to learn the meaning of that prophecy so we understand the sign of his second coming. So if people try to act like, oh, it's not about the land of Israel anymore, it's not about the Jews anymore, they have nothing to do with it, because of the gospel, what they are doing is they're making a fallacy to act like a prophecy can only have one kind of fulfillment and denying dual fulfillment, and that's how you get replacement theology, okay? First of all, that doesn't stand up to the apostolic teaching, which we can see from the book of Romans, and we also can see it in the book of Revelation. Okay, so we have two New Testament witnesses that there is a future plan for a remnant of Israel who are currently blinded. Okay, we know that, but it's also specifically laid out in Joel, in Zechariah, in Ezekiel, having to do with the physical land of Israel. It specifically references people from the tribe of Judah, people from the tribe of Levi. Those you could say, Israel is the church, and you could even say Christians are the true Jews, but you need to explain then why is it talking about Levites? Why is it talking about specific clans of the tribes of Judah in Zechariah? Why is it talking about the 12 tribes of Israel in the book of Revelation? Okay, you can't just take all these very specific national names and tribal names and say, oh, those are just metaphors for the church. Okay, you are erring in your hermeneutics if you're doing that. Okay, now we have the Antichrist that says dividing the land for gain. And again, this word gain literally means profit. And this is why I hold to the possibility, and this is, John and I have been having this conversation in the background for years. I told him, I said, if Trump does something to divide the land of Israel for a real estate deal that he has a personal gain on, that could be a sign of something the Antichrist is going to do. Now, he hasn't succeeded in doing that yet, but he's trying. Just like we've had multiple presidents try to divide the land of Israel with a two-state solution. They've been trying for years, but nobody's succeeded. Now, what I suspect, based on the conglomerate of these prophecies, is that division has to include the West Bank going to the Palestinians and the Temple Mount going to the Jews. Okay? So I suspect the deal to include that, but it could include what Trump is doing in Gaza. If Trump presides over all that, he may be the Antichrist. However, I'm leaning towards the belief that he is setting up a lot of things that will be ultimately carried forward by another. Now, I could be wrong. It could be him after his term here is done and after World War III, or it could be somebody who he's currently setting up. Okay? Now, that's the one witness for the division of the land. The second witness from the division of land, you need to know Joel. You need to go and read Joel 2 and compare it to Revelation 6 and Ezekiel 38 and 39 and see that it's very clearly the same war. The second thing you need to do is go to Joel 3. Now remember, at the end of this, blood, fires, pillars of smoke, and the sun turned darkness and the moon turned to blood, it talks about the Spirit being poured out. That is the latter rain. The latter rain is not William Branham. The latter rain is not the charismatic movement. It's not Azusa Street. It's not the Seven Mountains anything, okay? The latter rain is the sealing of the 144,000 of Israel to evangelize Israel after the fullness of the Gentiles have all been evangelized through a worldwide persecution of Christians, okay? So we see these things lining up with the six seals of Revelation, and then what do we see in Joel 3? He says, in those days and at that time, I will bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now listen to this. This is in Ezekiel 38 and 39. He's going to gather all the Jews from every last place that he's scattered them after World War III. That's what he says very clearly. It's also in Zechariah. And in that context, it talks about a judgment on a place it calls the North Country, where the white horse and the black horse go there. That represents religious deception and economic collapse. Okay? The North Country, I believe, is North America. I think that's what it is. Okay? So he calls it the North Country because you can't identify it with any one of the nations from the ancient table of nations. So he just calls it the North Country. And it happens to be the place where he also describes a large remnant of the Jews coming back from in the last days, which is, where are they? They're here. They're here in America, about half of them. Okay? So again, we see this, and then it says, we gather them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat. That is the valley that is between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. Okay, that's where he's gathering them. That's where I believe the division took place. And he says, and I will plead with them there for my people, for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. Okay, the context of what he's saying here, they didn't scatter the church among the nations and part his land. Okay, this is talking about ethnic Israel. This is one of the oldest prophets when Israel's still a nation. They're talking about the coming of the Assyrian Empire. Okay, that's the context. And so that's the immediate future context, but you're going to have a spiritual context too, because Peter is going to cite this in reference to the outpouring of the Spirit at Pentecost. Paul is going to cite it in Romans 10 in terms of whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So there's a spiritual component, there's a historical component, and there's also an eschatological component. And you need to understand this idea of dual or even triple fulfillment in prophecies has always been normal in Israel. Okay? So he says his heritage Israel, would that include the church? Well, you could say it could, but scattered among the nations has, from Deuteronomy, always been about the ethnic Israel, and parting his land has always been about the land of Israel, the promised land given to Abraham. Remember, Jesus is the heir of all the promises to Abraham, and that promise was for a specific land that is mentioned to Abraham, it's mentioned to Moses, it's mentioned to Joshua, and it's mentioned to Ezekiel related to the millennium. So you can't get around that is the physical land of Israel, okay? And it says they've cast lot for my people, and they talk about them being sold. Then they talk about the people of Tyre, Zidon, in Palestine. That's southern Lebanon and the Gaza Strip being sold away. In other words, being ethnically cleansed from the land, okay? So that's what's going to happen, and then it's going to lead up into Armageddon. Okay, this Joel 3 is essentially Daniel's 70th week. Joel 2 is essentially takes place during the 7 seals, or the Ezekiel 38-39 war, or Revelation 6. Okay, very easy, very clear to understand if you are familiar with prophecies. Most of the people who will disagree with me on that, fine, disagree, but this is what you need to do. You tell me what you think. You interpret all of Joel 2, okay? Because I've interpreted the whole thing publicly. Interpret all of Ezekiel because I've interpreted the whole thing publicly. I want to hear your alternative explanation. I don't want to hear your one-liner about how this can't be that because the rapture, or because the doctrine of imminence, or because I'm just wrong because I'm a heretic because blah, blah, blah. Give me your alternative explanation. If you think my explanation is wrong, what's yours? And what you're going to find out with most of your eschatology buff heroes is they're like, I don't know, that's too hard to unravel. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody can understand it. That's what they're going to tell you. And that's how I can tell you that their eschatology is based on a few weak arguments, and they have not run those arguments through the whole counsel of Scripture to see if they stand up to the data. The data is the whole counsel of prophetic literature, okay? And if we can't run that through and make it make sense with a bunch of things, we need to go back to the drawing board. I've been through all their eschatologies, and I went back to the drawing board and I wrote my own, okay? So, your white horse represents the great apostasy. Your red horse represents world war breaking out. Your black horse represents the collapse of the world economic order, which is focused around the American petrodollar right now, and the fiat anti-gold standard policy that we're on, which means America's going to get hit centrally and the hardest with this collapse. The pale horse, these guys say it represents pestilence. The two versions of the 4 horses, the one in Zechariah has the horses being dappled or spotted, and in the book of Revelation has them a pale green. And I would say Both of those seem to represent a person being sick with a virus, okay? So what I would suggest that the pale horse represents a virus. I would say COVID's probably part of that, but it's probably not the end of that. And also, it says death follows with them, and it says they kill with the beasts of the earth, and I forget, I think pestilence. Jesus mentions pestilence in what's leading up to the end times too. Famine, war, and death. I'm going to suggest to you why it says and death, to kill them with death. That's just old age. And I think we have a huge demographic problem where the boomers are now in their 70s. Like my dad would be like a late boomer. My mom would be early Gen X. And they're in their late 60s and early 70s now, okay? Your boomer generation is around 70 years old right now. So remember what the Bible says about these times. Men's hearts failing them for fear of what is coming on the earth, okay? Your average person in your 70s is not in great shape, especially in America, okay? My dad is in excellent shape for his age, so he might live through this, okay? But this is a guy who's exercised his entire life diligently, still gets on his feet, still does regular physical manual labor, and people who are like that might endure through this. People who are not in good health, heart's not great, cholesterol level's not good, they have not formed a habit of walking on a regular basis once they got older. These people are probably going to drop dead. They're probably going to have heart attacks, anxiety, panic, and die. And the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed with World War III, probably pandemics. And they're not going to be able to take care of all these people. And that is a global problem, okay? The boomer thing is not an American thing. It is a global problem. Everybody had a ton of kids right after World War II because the whole world was being helped by America to rebuild. And so we see this problem in China, in Japan, in Iran, in Europe, in America, okay? The main places we don't see a problem with people not having enough kids is among African and Arab countries and Latin American countries, particularly among the poor, okay? Now, in Africa, they have a lot of kids, but they also have a huge AIDS problem. They have a short lifespan problem. Your average age in a lot of African countries is still pretty low. It's significantly lower than a lot of other parts of the world because of the AIDS epidemic being such a big deal over there. But the point is you're going to have a lot of people just die of old age. And there's going to be a couple of different disagreements on what this, it says, is it a fourth of mankind or is it a fourth part of the earth? Well, if you go to the book of Revelation, chapter 6, it is going to tell you that this fourth horse is given power over a fourth part of the earth. It says over a fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and with the beasts of the earth. So if you look at a fourth part of the earth, it says a fourth part of the gay, that is the physical earth, okay? So what does that mean? Now this could mean, because notice this is the beasts of the earth, okay? Now this could mean that most of this death takes place in a certain part of the earth. I don't buy that argument because World War is going to be breaking out. So I don't buy, maybe you could take all of the fronts of where the battles are and all the places where people are the most economically affected and say that's a fourth part of the earth, but I don't buy that, okay? Now, the people who are going to argue that the fourth part of the earth does not mean a quarter of all people, but just a fourth part of the earth are going to affect it. The reason is going to be is that in Revelation 9, it talks about how this person kills a third part of men. So notice it doesn't say part of the earth, it says a part of men, right? And this is where they might say, now if they wanted to say a third part of men, they would say, or a fourth part of mankind, they would say a fourth part of men, like they say with a third, okay? And I'm gonna offer them that maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong and they're right. Maybe this doesn't kill a quarter of the earth. But if it doesn't kill a quarter of the earth, then this third part is going to kill even more people than under my estimation. Because my estimation would be a quarter of the earth is killed, and then of the remaining 3/4, a third of that is killed. So that's half the earth dead, roughly, by the time Christ gets here. Okay? And that's not Armageddon. That's by the time of the rapture. Okay? If they're right, it could be less than a fourth part, but then a third part of the remainder. Either way, any way you spin it, you're somewhere between a third and a half of the earth dead by the time of the rapture. Okay? Either way. Okay? So if I'm wrong, I might be wrong, but you're still going to have a third part of all of humanity killed in the first half of Daniel's 70th week. That's a ton of people being killed. But remember, by this time, remember, my dad is a young boomer, okay? The boomer generation will be like 78, 79. That's the end of the boomer generation, okay? Which means the boomers by this time are going to be between 79 and roughly 100, okay? They're going to die of old age by this time. And the generation beneath them cut the average amount of kids they had to like 2, 3. And then the generation beneath them cut the average amount of kids they had to between 1 and 2, okay? So the world is going to drastically decrease its numbers during these times. Plus, you're going to have a lot of people not having kids because they're so scared of the economic circumstances. This happens when you have major stresses in the earth. You have a lot of people not having kids. They might be having sex, but they're not having kids. Okay? It's hard to carry a child to term when you have a ton of stress and anxiety and famine and anxiety and stuff like that coming, putting pressure on your body, okay? And that's excluding the war and the pestilence, the persecution, and just the cullings of people that are going to be going on, okay? We're going to have nuclear war. So what you want to look for, if Christ comes in the next 8 years, between a third and half the people dead by then, look around you. 1 out of 3 are dead. Minimum. Maybe 1 out of 2, okay? So this is, I tend to have an early estimate. I think the earliest Christ could come is 2,000 years from his ascension, which would put you in the late spring of 2033. Okay? That's the earliest he could come. That doesn't mean he has to come then, but there are a lot of things that are lining up for him to be on time, if you will. Okay? Now, these are slides that I put for an old study of the book of Revelation. You can see that on there. I did a Zoom study during COVID with a few people on the book of Revelation. But essentially, again, these are the 4 horses: apostasy, economic upheaval, World War III, and then persecution and death, okay? Remember, before we get into Daniel's 70th week, we're going to have a worldwide persecution of Christians, which I believe is going to be treating Christians, Christian Zionists, dispensationalists, and eschatological futurists largely as the scapegoat for the problems Trump causes, and as basically the getting rid of the impediment to us all coming together for this new age, new world order. I see that happening, okay? I see multiple people getting pushed on multiple different fronts to blame futurist eschatologists, and particularly people who believe God has a future plan for Israel, and yes, among them Christian Zionists, which I am not a Christian Zionist, okay? I do not believe that it's a Christian's job to root for or politically support the ethno-state of Israel, okay? The Zionist regime in Israel. I do not think it's our business to speak out against it or rally against it either, because I think it's something God is doing, but God doesn't need our help in making his prophetic plans come to pass, nor does he need us to morally justify what political leaders are doing in Israel in order to help God. He doesn't need that, okay? God uses wicked people who do wicked things to perform his prophetic ends all the times, and some of that prophetic ends is God prophecies that he's going to ethnically cleanse Gaza. You can't get around that. It's in Joel 3, okay? But that doesn't mean the people who are doing it are justified. This is consistent with God using the king of Assyria, the king of Babylon, Alexander the Great, on down the line, okay? Alexander the Great's a bisexual, philandering, guy who thinks he's a god. Okay, God uses him. See, so this is not a justification for Netanyahu. It's not a justification for the Israeli government. It's not a justification for Christian Zionism. It's just telling you what God says he's going to do and saying he uses means. He uses people, sometimes good, sometimes bad, to accomplish his means. Okay, so that's that. Now we get into Psalm 83, Micah 5, and Isaiah 12 through 21 as the contextual passages that describe this war, which ultimately leads to Joel 2 and Gog Magog before it goes nuclear. And within the context, after it goes nuclear, that's when it seems to be the heavens are shaking, the earth is shaking, the stars fall from heaven, the sun turns to darkness, and the moon turns to blood. And that event, this cosmic disturbances, as some might call them, but specifically the sun turning to darkness and the moon turning to blood, gets the earth to stop fighting, and there is going to be a what would you call it? Like this paradigm shift in the world. Like, what the heck just happened? We need to stop. And in that context, that's when you're going to have the one world government rise. That's when you're probably going to have the persecution of Christians will have already been going on at this point. The World War III ends, and there's going to be some kind of official explanation for what happened, okay? Now, I believe the stars falling to heaven is going to literally be like shooting stars / asteroid debris / perhaps satellites falling to the sky. I believe the sun turning to darkness, and this, what is described, you can find this in, I think, Isaiah 24, is the earth being topsy-turvy like a drunken man. What this sounds like is something showing up that affects the earth gravitationally that allows it to spin like crazy. Remember, the earth is a magnetic pole. So if you get another planet or a planetary object or a moon-sized object that comes near it with a magnetic pole of its own, how do magnets interact with each other when you put the common ends of the poles next to each other? They start flipping out and spinning and going crazy, okay? I see something like that happening with the planet. That's what I see happening, and what I suspect that to be is a near appearance of the New Jerusalem. That's what I think it is. That's how I reconcile the sun turning to darkness and the moon turning to blood at the same time, because under normal circumstances that would never happen at the same time. Okay? Something else would have to block out the sun and cast a red shadow on the moon, and the New Jerusalem is big enough, it's small enough to fit behind the moon and be blocked from our view, but it's big enough if it's a little closer to the moon to cause that to happen, and probably also to radically throw off the Earth's gravitational pull, okay? Because in Revelation 6, you have people fleeing underground and claiming and saying, hide us from him who sits on the throne in the wrath of the Lamb, I expect that they know it is the New Jerusalem, okay? I expect that there are people in the world, like your Peter Thiels, not necessarily him, but people like him, who both believe the book of Revelation is true and yet don't interpret it properly and still serve the Antichrist, okay? I think there's always been people like that in the earth that Gnostically interpret the scriptures. That's in my Serpent by the Way book. We're going to show that these people have always been around. They believe there's divine inspiration in them, but they think they interpret them as, well, that's aliens. Well, that's, whatever, Sasquatch. Well, that's this or that. That's really the post-flood or the Ice Age and the post-flood from the Ice Age. And they believe the stuff in the Bible is divinely inspired in the way that they view inspiration as, like, we all have the divine spark in us, and some people wrote this down. But they interpret it through a materialistic scientific lens, which leads them to cryptids, to aliens, to things having to do with space exploration, to things having to do with old Earth and Ice Age and evolution, okay? And these people seem to go underground. This is the kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the chief captains and the mighty men and every bondman and every freeman hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks and the mountains. Now, it's not every single one of them, but it's every single one of the ones that are ready. Like, they've been planning for this. They go underground, they say, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Now, the throne is in the New Jerusalem. So I think they're saying the New Jerusalem is here. And in their estimation, the immediate coming of the kingdom is here, but it's not yet. And so this is how I suspect this will happen, is that the New Jerusalem is going to appear to the degree that it causes these effects, but it's not obvious to everyone it's the New Jerusalem, but it's obvious to certain people that are in the occult know that go underground, okay? Again, this is in Isaiah 2 and in Isaiah 24. Go read those passages. It explains these people. They go down underground and they continue to worship their idols, okay? And remember, idols ultimately turns into the image of the beast, transhumanism, people being downloaded, their souls being downloaded into robots. That seems to be the basis for their belief, okay? It's after that that the sealing of the 144,000 happens. That's the latter rain being poured out, and then we enter into Daniel's 70th week, okay? The latter rain being poured out, and this nuclear war, and there's going to be a nuclear dissolution treaty, that leads us into Daniel's 70th week. Now, there's a lot of people that are like, that's an overreach to say that this is nuclear. I don't think so. I think if you read Ezekiel 39 for yourself, you sit here and go, okay, either these are guys who are like trying to cleanse the land from being ritually unclean, or this is people covering up stuff that has nuclear radiation attached to it. Okay? Those are the only ways you can interpret that in Ezekiel 39. Okay? Now, the one way you can interpret it is that this is Armageddon, it's all over, and we're in the millennium now. How do we know this? Because if you go to Isaiah 66, which talks about the millennium and people coming up to worship Christ in the millennium, what it says is, and it shall come to pass from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me. Now we know this is the annual Feast of Tabernacles. It's in Zechariah 14, where all of the nations have to come up to worship him at the Feast of Tabernacles annually, or it won't rain on their lands. So when they come up to worship him, it says, they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring to all flesh. Okay? So here you go. This is not Ezekiel 38, because at the end of Ezekiel 38 and 39, they bury all the bodies within 7 months. This is saying when they go up from new moon Sabbath to another, and remember, all flesh is coming up annually for the Feast of Tabernacles, they're seeing those carcasses still there. These are left on display. These are the armies that would have been killed at Armageddon. They're left there. It's a different location where they're killed in Ezekiel 38. It's actually on the other side of the Sea of Galilee where they're killed, which is basically beneath the Golan Heights, which is where they would come in to invade Israel, while this group is going to be actually in the Valley of Megiddo, which is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, okay? So they're two different groups. One is left on open display, and one is left, one gets buried within 7 months. You want to make sure not to get these two wars mixed up, because all your eschatology buffs do. Telling you, all of them get them mixed up. Chuck Missler didn't, Joel Richardson does, Chris White does, John Holler does. They all get them mixed up, okay? You look at the details, they're different wars with different outcomes. Now remember, at the end of this, and this is earlier in Isaiah, it talks about a highway between Assyria and Egypt where people will go up and spread the gospel and come up and worship the Lord. So what's going to happen? You're not going to have all the nations in the world all making port at Israel and going up. You're going to have them making port around it, probably in Turkey and in and Egypt if they're coming from that way, and probably down in Iraq and maybe Saudi Arabia or whatever. And then they go up. They're going to be going up and down. It's called the King's Highway and the Miavaris. These are two roads that have been around since ancient times that are meant to take you by Jerusalem, and then you go up to Jerusalem for these annual feasts. You take a pilgrimage on foot, and you have a tent with you. It's a Feast of Tabernacles, okay? So as you're going from the north, you're going to see these bodies that he destroyed, okay? You wouldn't see them if they were on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, because you wouldn't come that way. You would come up through northern Israel, okay? So we know this. Now, that takes you into Daniel's 70th week. All this takes you into Daniel's 70th week. So what are we looking for between now and then, okay? If this is our paradigm to get to Daniel's 70th week, what are we looking for between now and then? Well, by the time we get to Daniel's 70th week, we know there's going to be 10 kingdoms, okay? Now, John had brought to my attention that the board of peace that Trump is building might have around 10 kings. I think Trump is personally trolling stuff that he knows is in the book of Revelation. I do, okay? We don't have any reference to these being 10 kings, nor are they 10 leaders of nations. So you can't have... This could be a microcosm of dividing the land of Israel, but you've got Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. You've got Milei from Argentina, who's just a retard. It's just basically a board of Trump sycophants. That's all it is, okay? He's invited Putin. He's invited Kim Jong-il. He's invited a lot of people, but these people have not accepted. The president of Canada has accepted. And we know, I think, who else? Milei has accepted. And the other ones are Jared Kushner, who's not the leader of anything, except maybe he's the false prophet, and then Steve Witkoff, who's just a bad head of state, Secretary of State. Okay, Marco Rubio's also on. No, I'm sorry, Witkoff is some other diplomat, I forget, and then Rubio's on it. Okay, so you have a bunch of people who are on this so-called Board of Peace that is headed by Trump, but all these people could be voted out and fired in the next administration, and then what is going to happen? Are they going to still maintain their positions there? Well, how are their offices going to be funded? Where is this political authority going to come from by which they're going to govern the Gaza Strip? They don't get into that. They don't know how. This is why Trump is trying to sell seats to this Board of Peace for $1 billion. Why? Well, if we can collect $10 billion right now, then we at least can fund the offices of these people to pretend they have authority over the Gaza Strip, okay? We do not have an international settled division of the Gaza Strip as its own nation or being under the sovereign control of anyone, okay? It is still basically a land that is under the sovereign control of Israel, which Israel has now largely ethnically cleansed, and they're going to fully ethnically cleanse. And what this Board of Peace is being given authority to is to manage it. Again, it's not its own entity, it's not its own state, but manage it under an international jurisdiction that doesn't seem to be based under the UN. It seems to be based on sycophancy to Donald Trump. And that might be something that plays as long as the Trump administration goes on. But as soon as the Trump administration is over, the whole world, I promise you, is not going to submit to these guys' claim of authority over the Gaza Strip. I promise you that. There needs to be something that happens that has either like a UN seal of approval on it. Israel needs to be at that table, a NATO guarantee, something that has that authority backed up with money and political authority. And right now, those things are not there, okay? Now, I expect something like that after the end of World War II, but right now that is not there, okay? Plus, this Board of Peace would have no authority over anything but Gaza, so to act like that could be the 10 kings does not seem reasonable at this point, okay? Again, Trump could be trolling. First of all, we don't even know that there's going to be 10 of them because he's invited like 30 people, okay? Second of all, he's demanding $1 billion to maintain your seat. And who's that $1 billion going to go to? Is it going to go to Trump directly, a fund that maintains the government of Gaza? Like, where are these? He's saying give him $1 billion to maintain your seat. So bribe Trump. Where's this money going? Is it going into Trump's pocket? How is he selling essentially a gubernatorial seat to the Gaza Strip? Now, who these people could be is what Zechariah 12 calls the governors of Judah. Gaza was part of the allotment of the territory for Judah, and Zechariah talks about, I think it's Zechariah 10, but hold on just a second. No, it's Zechariah 12. Behold, I'll make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to all people round about, and they shall be in siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. So this is probably the Gog-Magog war. And in that day I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut to pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. So in other words, even if it's everybody against Jerusalem, whoever, it says, burdens themselves with Jerusalem, and that could be supporting it or fighting against it, is going to be cut to pieces. It's not going to go well, okay? Well, who's largely burdening themselves with Israel right now? The U.S. I suspect the U.S. is going to have a hand in dividing Israel, and as a result, they're also going to be divided. I think they're going to be divided by the end of World War III, like Germany was divided at the end of World War II, to make sure America never rises again as a superpower. It says he'll smite every source with astonishment, his rider with madness. And then it says, the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength in the Lord of hosts their God. Okay? So the inhabitants of Jerusalem obviously are ethnic Jews. The governors of Judah could be someone like this board of peace that largely sucks up to Israel. And what we're seeing here among Christian Zionists and Westerners in general is people talking about how Israel is the front line in the defense of Western civilization. Okay? So when Israel comes out unscathed in this world war, when the U.S. and Russia are going to decimate each other, Jerusalem could be seen as having God's divine providence, God's divine favor. Again, that religious rhetoric is very much in the air right now, so that won't be shocking at all. And then also the idea of Israel being the front lines of the defense of Western civilization will be amplified to the hilt, and you will see an attempt probably to militarize the Middle East to the east of the Euphrates, and you'll probably see Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and probably to a lesser extent Jordan, but you'll see these guys probably take over Syria and Iraq up to the Euphrates River. You'll probably see Iran and the Kurds take it over up to the west of the Euphrates River. And because you're going to have a global earthquake before that, all these dams there's going to be a lot of dams all over the world that are going to be broken. If you live downriver from a dam, by the end of World War III, I would move your butt as far away from where that river could flood you. Okay? This is going to be a worldwide earthquake. So what you're probably going to see is all these dams in Turkey that have been keeping the Euphrates River shallow, all of a sudden making it heavy again. Okay? And that will become the front line between the East and the West. And what you're going to see is probably a lot of the AI efforts that have been being formed in America, but really spread out over what is called this Pax Silica, which is essentially anti-Chinese or competitive to Chinese interests that are part of the AI supply chain. You're going to see that center shift from America to probably somewhere like Neom. Israel is not big enough. It doesn't have the infrastructure for it, but Saudi Arabia definitely could because they can burn oil forever to power data centers forever. Okay? So you're probably going to see that shift to Neom. Okay? That would be my guess. And that would allow for Neom to get all the funding and the big, expansive building dream that they hope they're going to have. Okay? Now, these are fronts that you're probably going to see expand as we get into World War III. Now, the idea of there being 10 super states, again, this goes all the way back to right here. The Club of Rome had this thing, this projection. Let's bring this to the front. This projection back in the 70s, okay? In the textbooks, I was a social studies major in my undergrad 20 years ago, okay? Maps like this, not necessarily the Club of Rome map, but similar maps displaying 10 super economic regions like this one here were in the social studies UN related textbooks, okay? So the idea to break down the earth into 10 super economic spheres, notice who's out. Notice this is a recent one from a textbook. Notice Mongolia, North Korea, Iran, Ukraine, Belarus, those guys are out. Why? They're in the Soviet sphere. You see versions of this where you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You could say 10, you could say 11 right here, okay? You see these spheres, and there's usually about 10 of them in their economic spheres, okay? So this list I'm going to give you is a theory. It's a projection. It's not something that I'm going to be locked down on. I actually had stuff that was coincidental in my book, how they were actually, there were 10 nations involved in the Syria conflict when I first wrote my book. And I made note of that, but I didn't say that's it. I said those 10 nations could be part of something like the Board of Peace that ends up governing the Middle East post-World War III. There could be something like that. But what I've always held as the most likely candidate for the 10 Kings is something like what the Club of Rome has, something like what these textbooks have, because the world has been growing in that direction ever since the EU was formed in the 70s, okay? It's like the EU was the prototype, and then these economic blocks forming was the other thing. Now, I would expect the kings of the East, these are the BRIC nations, to not necessarily be one block, but kind of a competitive interest to what Trump seems to be forming right now in Pax Silica, okay? Now, Pax Silica, and I'm going to get more into this later, the fact that it's using Pax, that's a very Roman, the Pax Romana, it means peace in Latin, okay? So the peace of Silica, that's literally about a technocracy. They're very much projecting a new world technocratic order like the Roman Empire, okay? They're saying the loud part pretty loud, okay? So expect that is where it is, and expect that Trump and many people loyal to Trump think that's going to be something that they're going to have being centered around America and its economy, and that will keep America strong for generations to come. If that is Trump's real goal, it's going to fail. It may not be his real goal. It may be something that's scripted to fail, and he may or may not be in on that, okay? Again, could Trump be a puppet for somebody else? Yes, I think Trump is largely a puppet for who's been running Trump. Well, we know Peter Thiel and Jared Kushner. What do they both have in common? They're not super loyal to America. Peter Thiel is from South Africa, and his family's from Germany, and he's definitely a transhumanist. Jared Kushner is very loyal to Netanyahu, and he's definitely a transhumanist, and he's been doing business deals in Bulgaria, okay? So you're talking about people who, again, track back to the EU and Israel in terms of their connections, who've been running Trump. So could Trump be somebody who's like, he's a bombastic nutcase, and people are pulling his strings? Yes. Is Trump the mastermind behind this? No, I do not think he is. Is he a guy who needs to look dominant and look like he gets the credit for everything? Yes, I think he is, but I think people are getting their own ideas passed through him as long as they suck up to him and give him all the credit for it. That's what I think is going on with the tech bros. That's what I think is going on with the Christian nationalists and the CMP. That's what I think is going on with Jared Kushner in Israel. I think there's a lot of people who've figured out all you need to do is say, nobody could have done this but Trump, and you'll get away with your agenda under his nose. Make him look great for it. Make him look like it couldn't have been accomplished without him, and you'll pull off your agenda under his nose. That being said, is Trump an idiot? Is he a dumb old man? To degrees, yeah. I do not think he is the mastermind. I don't think he's the mastermind. I do think he is a out of control man. Maybe he thinks he's the mastermind. But again, his thing was, I'm going to get the greatest people and thereby be the greatest. And so I think a lot of the ideas are not coming from him. I think he has certain inputs, and I think a lot of it boils down to, how you butter him up and how you frame things as going to be successful business-wise, and he's going to reap personal rewards for it. He's going to reap the accolades of having accomplished it. I think straight-up bribery goes on. I think he's a petty guy, and pettiness is going to play with him, okay? The fact that he's saying, here, I'm making this board of peace, give me $1 billion and you can be on it, says he's a petty dude. The fact that he was selling American citizenship for $1 million says he's a petty dude, okay? He is a cheap salesman. That's all he is, who comes for money, okay? Do I think he's the Antichrist? I still don't. I still think he is a forerunner. But I think he's meant to look close enough like the Antichrist that when his either plan fails or he dies or goes down, people suspect that the Antichrist has fallen. That's what I think. That's what I've held the entire time. I still think that is more likely, but I'm open to the possibility that I'm wrong, that he has some continuation of political and business authority after he leaves office, and that allows him to potentially be the Antichrist. I just don't. I don't think he is. Jared Kushner's younger than me. I'm much more privy to the idea that he might be the false prophet than Trump is the Antichrist. Just his age, just how polarizing he is, and how many people definitely would switch to being super anti-Trump once he's out of office. I think we live in a world full of sycophants and suck-ups, and because he won the election, there's a lot of people that were really left or left-leaning centrists who are now like, yeah, Trump's great, and they don't really think it. Okay, they think this is what you got to do to pay to play in this environment, and that's what they're doing. Okay, I think there's people right in his inner circle. I think Marco Rubio hates him. I think Marco Rubio, every time you look at his face, he looks like somebody who says things he knows he hates that he has to say he has to, but he's sick to his stomach every time he opens his mouth. Every time he represents Trump's agenda, I think he's sick to his stomach. I think he's probably one of those compromised men I've ever seen in politics, which leads me to believe he might have at one time been a pretty honest, decent guy. He just looks so uncomfortable whenever he promotes Trump's talking points and does his job that he's appointed to under Trump. I think he hates that he's there, but he knows he needs to be there for political relevance sake. I think Trump had the power to make him politically irrelevant if he didn't take the post, and he had to take the post. Okay? So that being said, that's internal politics, okay? What I see going on in terms of World War III fronts, I see there being a China-Taiwan front. China's going to take Taiwan. I think there's going to be a limited, maybe even some shots fired, maybe even some like, okay, we're going to let China take Taiwan, but if they cross certain lines, we're going to sink a ship, or we're going to fire on some stuff to just be like, hey, you came into Japanese water space, or, those are our allies in here, and you crossed the line, so we destroyed that ship, but we're not going to come to Taiwan's defense. I don't think China wants World War III. I don't think anyone wants World War with China. I don't think anyone wants a nuclear exchange with China, which could happen. China would be utterly devastated in a nuclear exchange. Because even though they have a big country, you got to remember, a huge chunk of their country is Gobi Desert in Himalayas. Yes, they have massive cities, but that's massive, massive casualties if one takes a nuke because they're so densely populated, okay? So I don't think China would like to escalate. I think there would be some stuff where Taiwan gets taken and maybe some shots fired to let China know, if you continue to push your weight beyond Taiwan, you got a fight on your hands, and that's probably how things settle out in that theater. India and Pakistan, I expect them to come to blows over Kashmir, because the other parties that would come to the table to try to mitigate that will have their hands full with other things. So expect something with China, Pakistan, probably limited involvement with, India and Pakistan primarily limited involvement from China and Afghanistan over the region of Kashmir. That is going to be settled out, but you're probably going to see some pushes and pulls. I doubt that it will come to nukes. I think this is just going to basically, you might see Kashmir permanently go somewhere, and I would expect that to be India. Because Pakistan is weak. Pakistan is weak, and without America backing it up, which we are more in the pockets of India than we are in Pakistan now, especially post-Afghanistan, I could see an Islamic bloc forming that involves Western or Eastern Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and some of these stand countries as Russia starts to take nukes and go down. And that bloc would probably bolster up Pakistan, and you would probably see Taliban and fighters brought into the front lines of keeping Iran super Islamic fundamentalists and moving Pakistan in the direction of Islamic fundamentalism as a bolster against their rivals in the Arab coalition with NATO and then with India. You're probably going to see India. Again, India has a lot of Muslims in it, but it has a lot more Hindus, okay? Bangladesh has a lot more Muslims in it, but they're surrounded by Hindus and Buddhists and people who are other religions like Tibet and this other thing. So they're not going to dominate. And all of these nations tend to share tourism, travel, trade, and migrant worker status. And you're going to see these migrants from these different countries going to probably China to deal with their demographic losses, and to the Middle East to deal with rich Arab money and being their service class. And so this whole region here is going to keep being this center for customer service workers, and in the case of China, tech outsourcing and stuff like that are going to be utilized by the West. And so you're probably going to see this block from India down through New Zealand and all this, Indonesia and all this, to be more in the sphere of the West because and India being central to that because they can stand up to China with sheer numbers. Okay, they're both nuclear powers, and then the sheer numbers. And remember, you take Russia out of the equation, there's a balance between this block here that I think is the 9. When they made this, they had something like Australia and South Africa as a block. I don't think that's going to be. I think this was pre-EU, but it was definitely pre-fall of the Soviet Union. And then they had Japan and South Korea as a block. I still could see Japan and South Korea as a block, but they could be part of this wider oceanic block. But I definitely see India and Southeast Asia as part of a block because nobody in Southeast Asia wants China to try to invade or dominate them, and they have stood up to China in the past and won. And so I think they would have a common enemy in resisting China's hegemony over the region. That would they ultimately be part of the Kings of the East? Possibly, because America might be at that time. And we could see a huge alliance shift away from being enemies to China to being allies with China against the Antichrist when that happens, okay? You're going to see the Russia-Ukraine thing continue to happen until Russia's got at least half of Ukraine up to the river of Kiev. People are saying, again, this is wars and rumors of wars, you guys. When pastors would talk about wars and rumors of wars in the 80s and 90s, nobody really knew what wars and rumors of wars were. Now we know. When we see YouTube and we see these fake videos talking about who's winning, who's losing, whose economy's falling apart, who's running out of weapons, who's on the brink of revolution and rebellion, this is wars and rumors of wars. Misinformation galore streamed right to your face. Not on news outlets, but right on your YouTube feed, okay? And this is what's going on right now. So Russia and Ukraine are probably going to continue to fight. Again, if America and Russia exchange nukes, which could happen earlier on in the war, we don't necessarily know, the EU is not going to want to get into a nuclear exchange with Russia. Remember, France and England have nukes, but Russia has a ton of nukes. And if Russia's like, we're just going to nuke the European Union, and they can rebuild, but they're going to be largely dominated by Muslims by the time they do, they don't want to risk that. And when Russia's going to have all these fundamentalist Muslims in their coalition, and then all these Muslims are taking over Europe, Russia's just like, if we nuke you, Islam rules the world. If we get a nuclear exchange, Islam will take over the world. Because they will. They're having the most kids. The whole world goes technologically backwards. Islam wins. They will. Okay? So you're probably going to see them settle out, and Russia would get at least half of Ukraine, and they would immediately link up with, let's get a map here, actually. Russia, if they get Ukraine up to, again, this is the, I think it's the Dnieper River, which is really what they want for security. The idea is they have a friendly government in Belarus. They can threaten Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, but they are NATO members, so they don't want to necessarily invade them because they do have a treaty, same with Finland and these guys, to say we're going in there. What they want to do is get into a status where Europe has to settle with them and continue buying oil from them. That is their governmental survival on the line, and so they need Ukraine in order to invade the Middle East with Iran and basically dominate the transport of oil and natural gas from the stand countries through the Black Sea, through Turkey, and from Iran and these countries in the Arab Middle East to the Mediterranean Sea, so they can force them. They have enough control over the oil transport lanes so that they can force them to buy oil from Russia and their allies, while Russia is the gatekeeper for that oil rather than Turkey. Right now, and this is, people don't know about this, this is why your people who want to put Turkey and Russia on the same side in the Gog-Magog war do not understand. Russia and Turkey have been enemies since Constantinople fell. Okay? They have never been on the same side in anything in their mutual existence. Never, ever, 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 ever. And all of Europe has always sided with Turkey against Russia, okay? So when people like John Haller want to sit here and go, and Joel Richardson want to sit there and go, the Antichrist comes from Turkey, and so does Gog-Magog, and I don't know why they're part of the EU, it's because they don't understand geopolitics well enough. They might understand politics, and they might understand some cultural stuff, but they don't understand the big game. The big game is geography, and the big game is if Russia gets ports Remember, if Turkey was not an ally to the EU and an ally to NATO, and Russia were to get ports on the Mediterranean Sea here, they would become the next America, because they have all these resources and now they have warm shipping lanes to everywhere in the Mediterranean, and they could compete. They can bring in cheap labor from elsewhere, but the point is they have the resources of the US and Canada combined. What has always kept them from being this dominant superpower that could take over all of Europe was the fact that they didn't have the ports to really expand their market share. Okay? This is why all of these people, and this is historically, even though Russia was Christian and Turkey was Ottoman Muslim, they would historically side with Turkey against Russia. This is why Turkey's a part of NATO and Russia's not. Okay? It's not about Christian versus Muslim. It's about Europe being dominated by Russia because they can get these ports and they have so much resources. Okay? So, what Russia wants to do is they want to get the River Kiev. The River Kiev is on. And then they want to get the Caucasus, which is Azerbaijan and Armenia, which we're heavily active in Azerbaijan, and so is Israel. We help them ethnically cleanse the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. And remember, part of the Gog-Magog invasion is telling Gog and Magog to set yourselves to be a guard for these other peoples, okay? So they're going to say, we're defending Russians in Ukraine. Next, we're going to say we're defending Russians in Georgia and take over that. Next, we're going to say we're defending the Armenians from Israel and the West and the Azerbaijanis trying to take them out. Well, the Azerbaijanis are Turks, okay? Turkey doesn't just have ambitions for a revived Ottoman Empire. They also have ambitions for a Turkestan, a pan-Turkish country from Turkey to Kazakhstan, which would be just as dangerous as Russia because it would have all these resources and all these ports, and all of a sudden they would have the means to start taking over lands from Russia and fighting against Russia directly, because this would be one big unified bloc, and how's Russia going to stop them? Russia doesn't have huge population numbers. Okay, they've been having like an average of 9 abortions per woman since the Soviet era. Okay, so if all these Stan countries were to join with Turkey, you would have like almost like a revived Scythia. Okay, and we're going to show you the map of what the world was like when Christ was here the first time. You would have almost like a revived Scythia. Okay, remember, when the Ottomans took over this, before that you had the Seljuk Turks take over this, and then these other Turks, I forget what their name were, take over Persia. Okay, there was a point when Turkey controlled everything, or Turkish people controlled everything from Turkey over to parts of India, and all the way up towards the Turks over here. This Xinjiang province of China is Turkish, okay? So China and Russia both have an interest in not seeing all these Turks, whose languages is almost the same, unite and form a bloc that could, from there, incorporate Afghanistan, incorporate Iran, incorporate Pakistan. And that would be a big, huge threat to China and the EU, okay? So we don't want to see this. We want to see the Turks divided, okay? And so this is why it's in Turkey's interest, the EU's interest, and China's interest to not see this pan-Turkestan happen, okay? Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who was mentioned by Zach at Wretched Watchman, okay? Go read Vladimir Zhirinovsky's book. Vladimir Zhirinovsky has a book that you can actually find on archive.com. Maybe it's not on archive.com, but it is on Open Library. You can borrow it and you can read it. Read the last chapter where this guy, remember, he predicted when Russia was going to invade Ukraine. He's dead now. This guy wrote about a new world order where basically China, Russia, the EU, and the US would dominate the lands south of them. Okay? And that would be how the new world order was. This is how he wants things, because he feels the threat of a pan-Turkestan is more dangerous to Russia than anything. Okay? This guy ran for president multiple times. I sat next to a Russian girl from Ukraine in my one of my political classes in my undergrad, and she said everybody in Russia loves this guy. He says all the things that Putin can't say publicly, okay? Like I said, he predicted the day and the hour of the Ukrainian invasion starting, which I believe will go down in history as the beginning of World War III. Okay? Vladimir Zhirinovsky, read My Struggle, read what his motives are, and you'll understand the Russian ethos in terms of what their real... They don't fear an invasion from Europe, okay? They don't fear an invasion from Europe. What they do fear is the Europeans continually interfering in the countries on their border, trying to put basically regimes in place that are more friendly with the EU and NATO than they are with Russia, and weakening Russia, while Turkey builds this united pan-Turkestan and eventually unites the Muslim world and the Stan countries and becomes a super bloc that dissolves Russia. That's what they fear, okay? And this guy was a diplomat to Russia, so he basically writes the Gog-Magog invasion into his plan for how to keep this from happening, okay? So you want to read this book. You want to understand this. Zach at Wretched Watchman, somebody clipped this. Read the book. I've heard him mention this guy. I don't know if he's read his book, okay? The game plan that seems to be operating on between Trump and Putin and China and stuff right now, which could involve Russia getting Ukraine and Trump getting Venezuela and basically being able to pull weight with Cuba and these guys in an exchange plan where China gets Taiwan, seems to be out of the playbook of this guy's idea of a new world order, okay? Don't be shocked when there's more than one plan for a new world order out there. Remember, don't think that Satan just has this one group of people who are all organized and work together and don't have competitive interests that are all working under Satan deliberately. It doesn't go like that. Even down to the very end of the world, we have the Battle of Armageddon because Satan doesn't really rule over a single elite that rules over the whole world. That is a myth, and that myth has been fomented by guys throwing you off of the scent of what their groups are doing. I'm talking John Birch Society, and I'm talking, we're not going to talk about the CIA, we're not going to talk about the Freemasons, we're not going to talk about the Christian Nationalists, we're going to talk about the global conspiracy of the Jews or the communists or the Jesuits, okay? These myths, these conspiratorial myths are there to throw you off the scent that there is always going to be multiple plans for a new world order and a one world government that ultimately result in the Battle of Armageddon. Make sure you understand that, okay? So Russia, they're going to link up with Iran. Now we're going to talk about Iran for a second. What's going on in Iran right now? Are they having a revolution? Are they being overthrown? I got to tell you what, depending on who you listen to and depending on what YouTube channel you're on, you could hear everything from it's all fake and maybe a few hundred people have died and maybe we've gotten some suckers to try to launch a revolution and maybe it's all just happening online to 50,000 people have been executed. And Iran is bringing in people from Afghanistan and Iraq to do the killings because their own internal police forces and guard and stuff like that do not want to kill Iranians because if this revolution gets the help it needs and it overthrows them, they know they will all be hung for killing their own people in the name of the Ayatollahs. Now, here's what I think is going on. I think there's an attempted revolution of Iran going on right now that seems to be led by Pahlavi, who goes back to the Shah, okay? He goes back to the Shah of Iran, who was a brutal dictator, who we put in place when we ousted the democratically elected Mossadegh, because Mossadegh basically didn't like the fact that I think it was like British Petroleum was pillaging their country of their oil resources and not giving them the revenues that they promised, okay? So they nationalized the oil resources, and CIA and MI6 turned around and overthrew Mossadegh, who is basically, this is what they started. This was the first one after the CIA is formed. Whenever somebody didn't like the fact that these sweetheart deals that the Brits and the Americans got during the colonial era, where they're getting the lion's share of the wealth from their resources, and they tried to say, no, deal's off, we're nationalizing these resources, here's your money, now get out of our country, we would say they're being backed by communists, and this is part of the global communist revolution, and we need to stop them, and we need to overthrow their country. And it just so happened the same guys who are saying we need to do this either directly or had friends tied to the economic interests that were opposed to their nationalization. So we do this in Guatemala, we do this in Chile, we do this in Argentina, we do this in Cuba, we do this in Nicaragua, we do this in parts of Africa, we do this in Iran. Iran was the first one, okay? After Mossadegh came the Shah. The Shah was related to the Sassanid dynasty, which was the royal dynasty. Or I'm sorry, he might have been related to the Achaemenids, okay? But it doesn't matter because the dynasties of Iran, going back to the Persians and the Medes and stuff like that, they've had revolutions again and again, okay? They've been overthrown. You had the Achaemenid dynasty overthrown by the Greeks. You had the Greek dynasty overthrown by the Parthians. You had the Parthian dynasty overthrown by the Sassanid dynasty. You had the Sassanid dynasty overthrown by the Caliphate. You had the Caliphate there overthrown by the Turks, and I forget the name of that dynasty, but it's in my Rightly Dividing book. And then you eventually have a Persian republic that is friendly to both the Russians and the Americans during World War II, because that's where they met during World War II, okay? And so it's after this that they have a democratically elected leader that nationalizes British oil interests, and because World War II is over, we're right back to being against the communists, kinda, except when we're propping them up financially, which is all in, what's-his-name's, Carol Quigley's book. We know we were propping up the Soviet Union and playing this game to unify all the world's economies in the bipolar camp of Russia and America so that we can eventually synthesize that into a one world government. That was a plan of the 1800s through the 20th century. Okay, Iran was a major piece of that, and that's what got started the problems between the fundamentalist Ayatollahs who overthrow Iran in an Islamic revolution in response to the overthrow of their democratically elected leader, and they've been ruling ever since. Okay. Iran has had conflicts with Afghanistan recently. Turkey and Pakistan have a mutual defense treaty, and notice they're surrounding Iran, okay? So Iran has problems with all of its neighbors right now except Iraq and probably Turkmenistan, okay? The Iranians are a distinct people. They're mixed with Turks, but not quite Turks. They have Mongols there, but they're not quite Mongols. They have Arabs that have taken over parts of it at times, but they're not quite Arabs. They are their own people, okay? And they are the first Japhetite empire, so there's a huge national pride there. There is also, they're very mountainous. This is called the Iranian Plateau. This is a very high elevation. This would be a very hard place for anyone to take and hold. Afghanistan is in the Stone Age compared to Iran, and they might be able to have a little bit of conflicts here, but there's no way these guys could ever take it over. Iran would fundamentally make the best hub for a wider pan-Islamic caliphate. It just would. Versus Saudi Arabia, which is surrounded by desert and ocean and really easy to invade and take over. Okay? Iran would be the best place, or a Turkey. Okay? Turkey is a walled-off nation. Turkey does not want a pro-Israel government in Iran. What I believe Turkey is doing is leveraging so that they're the only ones who can make peace with Israel to make this Abraham Accords work, because it doesn't work without Turkey on the side of the Arabs in Israel, and they know it. And so they're playing the we're Muslims and we hate Israel card right now, which guys like Joel Richardson and John Haller fall for big time to think, oh, Turkey just wants to take over everything. They can't. They can't take over everything because they would have opposing interests in Iran. They would have opposing interests with these governments, these stand countries who don't want Turkey taken over. They'd have opposing interests in Russia. They'd have opposing interests in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, in China. Turkey is not going to do this by themselves, okay? They need NATO. They need Israel, and they need Saudi Arabia. They always have, because without them, they've been at a country that could have been taken over by Russia in the past. And they, if Russia and Iran got together, which we know they're getting together in the Gog-Magog war, and we know that Vladimir Zhirinovsky's book calls for the dissolution of Turkey, because it's not just all Turks, and it's these were invading peoples that came from here, right? It's like Iran was invaded by them too, but they eventually took back over, and it's Iranian peoples now. These are Persian peoples, okay? But Turkey took over, and they stayed in power because they became the Ottoman Empire, and then the Ottoman Empire fell, and they became the Republic of Turkey, okay? So the Turkish people are the dominant people there, but all these people groups are not Turkish. Remember, these were Greeks and Assyrians. There are Kurds there. There are Armenians there. Back in after World War I, which was just 100 years ago, this whole half of the country they planned on giving to Armenia. Kurdistan would take over like a third of it. So you have Greeks over here that are part of Turkey. You definitely have remnants of Greek people there. And then you have remnants of Ludians or Lydians. You have remnants of Assyrians and other Japhethite peoples that have been in Turkey the whole time. Is Turkish their main language? Yes, it is. But you have a lot of people that would not cry for months over the dissolution of Turkey. Okay? And Russia would want that. Turkey needs all of these people. Remember, NATO over here, the Arabs over here, and even, yes, Israel, as much as they need Turkey in their sphere rather than in the sphere of Russia and Iran, okay? This is why I think the Antichrist comes from Turkey. Everybody wants them. The SCO wants them, okay? The BRICS nations wants them. NATO wants them. The Abraham Accords wants them. Everybody wants Turkey on their side, and Turkey knows it. It shouldn't be shocking because this is the original territory of the Hamites, Shemites, and Japhethites after Noah's Ark. Remember, Noah's Ark is over here, over by Lake Van. And the first settlement, I suspect, is over here up in the region of Syria, just south of Turkey. You have Antiochus Epiphanes was here. That's why the city of Antioch is part of Turkey. You have the Hittites Empire was here. The Assyrian Empire was largely here. Turkey is the heart of where all this stuff started after the flood. And then, what you see happening in Israel and Babylon after that is the byproduct of the descent of Noah's children from Turkey. Okay? So don't be shocked if the Antichrist comes from Turkey. Don't be shocked if Turkey doesn't play their hand until it puts them in a position where they are the linchpin and the dominant power in the side they take. And that, I believe, is Turkey signing the Abraham Accords and allying with Israel and the EU and NATO and becoming the new leader of NATO after America falls. That's what I think is going to happen. And then at that point, their alliance with Saudi Arabia and Turkey will make Islam and the Middle East, if you will, kind of super necessary for Europe. And so the Muslims have more dominance in Europe. You'll see a lot of the Jews coming back here and taking over probably Gaza, probably parts of Syria and Lebanon, because you're going to have 6 million Jews coming back from America, and you're going to see this probably repopulated, turned into farms, turned into what they're going to claim to be the millennium. They're going to claim to be, this is the kingdom come we've accomplished here. And then the Antichrist is probably going to arise within that context. Could that be Erdogan's son? I don't know. All I know is this guy seems to be biblically, ethnically a Danite, which the Danites mixed and mingled with peoples all over here. Again, right over here where Istanbul is, their capital is, Dardana, which means settlement of Dan, was right over here. Okay? So, could these people be ethnically tied to the Danites, but we don't know? Yes. Could they be people who make that claim to the Jews and be like, hey, we're actually Danites. We're not really Turks or Greeks or whoever they are. Yes. He could also come from Bulgaria. Here's Macedonia here. Notice that. So if we look at the Macedonian Empire, notice the territories it had at its height. It said from one of Alexander's, the kingdoms that break down from this comes the Antichrist. Okay, so notice here's Bulgaria here. Notice there is Macedonia right here. There's Greece right here. There's parts of, I think that is Albania right here. And there's Turkey right here. Again, my pick is Turkey because they make the most sense geopolitically. However, he could come from Bulgaria, Macedonia, Albania, which Jared Kushner is busy in these groups right now. Ironically, there's a guy who is a former member of the EU Parliament, whose name is, I know Left Behind fans, Nikolai, who apparently is going to be on Trump's Board of Peace, I think, maybe, or he might be one of the invitees. So, is this somebody I'm watching now? I don't know. It just says he was in January 2026. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that Mladenov has been designated as the Director General of the Board Peace. What does that mean? It means Trump is the chief authority of the thing, but he's the Director General of the thing. You cannot make this stuff up. The guy who's going to run Trump's Board of Peace is a guy named Nikolai. I checked. The Carpathian Mountains do not run into Bulgaria, but this is real news here. He's approved by Trump, and he is approved by Netanyahu. He is going to be the head of the Gaza group. Now, who is this guy? I don't know, but we need to have a video about this guy. Is this Nikolai Carpathia? Just a whole video. Is Nikolai Mladenov Carpathia? We need etymology done on this guy's name. We need links between him and Hal Lindsey. We need CMP connections. We need the massive conspiracy. Is Nikolai Mladenov Nikolai Carpathia? And have they known this since the 90s? Because they've been grooming this guy since he was, let's see, when was he born? In office. He was born in 1972, so he would have been, when they came out with the Left Behind series, he would have been in his 20s. Could they have, again, he's from Sophia, which means wisdom. This is the Gnostic version of the Holy Spirit God, if you will. He's from Sophia. He's 53, so he's 6 years older than me. He's got 3 kids. He's got a spouse, so I don't know if you could make he doesn't care for a woman. He's from King's College of London, University of National World Economy. I don't think that is the Royal or whatever, the one that Keynesian economics and New World Order Futurist Society came from. But apparently he was a EU Parliament member. He was a UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. He was a UN Special Representative for the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq, Bulgaria, and his name is Nikolai. You can't make this stuff up. All I'm saying is, if Trump were out to troll that, he's setting up the Antichrist or whatever, or he is the Antichrist, you need to explain how, if he goes down, who is in charge of the peace board over Gaza, which is where the Antichrist sets up as a camp and where he ultimately meets his end in Daniel 11. You have a guy named Nikolai in charge, who would have been around when Hal Lindsey and Jerry B. Jenkins wrote Left Behind. They started putting out the series of Left Behind in 1995, so this guy would have been just getting out of college at the time, and he would have been just getting out of college in the Royal something of London. He would have just been getting out of college, of King's College in London. Who knows what he was doing politically? It looks like he was the European Parliament for Bulgaria. He was there in 2007. So what was he doing before this? Who knows? Being groomed to be the Antichrist, perhaps. I don't know. I want to learn some more about this guy. I just want to learn some more about this guy. Does he fit the bill? The answer is, if this is a true map of Alexander's empire, he does come from the right location to be a potential Antichrist candidate. That would make me wrong about Turkey, but again, because Turkey is so problematic for so many people, they could need NATO as much as NATO needs them, and they could always be somebody that people are pointing to as something that is the super danger of the world, which Chuck Missler, the CNP member, was always telling people to watch. And now you have all these people worried about Gog Magog coming from Turkey. Watch my videos on Gog Magog and see how I don't think Turkey is a part of Gog Magog. The only way Turkey would be a part of Gog Magog is it does say the House of Togarmah with all its bands. Well, the House of Togarmah was basically the Turkmen, and so that would have been the predecessor to the Scythians, who did have some territory down in Turkey, but they were mostly, honestly, up in from Ukraine all the way over to India and the Uyghur district of China, okay? So if you were to say House of Togarmah with all of its bands must include Turkey, you would also have to argue that it must include the Xinjiang province of China, because those are Turks as well, okay? The main House of Togarmah are your stand countries right here in Central Asia, okay? So between the Himalayas and the Black Sea, that's them. And then they come down through here, because remember, the Persians or the Iranians were always in their way. But when they were weak, they could come down around the Black Sea and around the Iranian coast of the, or I'm sorry, this is, I think, the Caspian Sea, and get up into here where they are in Azerbaijan. But this was a strong Armenian kingdom back then, and it was called Urartu in Ezekiel's day, okay? So the House of Togarmah in Ezekiel's day was not here. The House of Togarmah was over here, okay? But they were all the way up into Ukraine. So the House of Togarmah, Magog, which was, we're going to show you a map of what it was like in Christ's day, was all up in here between basically North Korea and Russia, essentially the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire, okay? So that being said, because Turkey's a NATO member and all that, and they have their place walled off, do I believe Turkey has ambitions to be in the front lines of this? Yes. Could the Antichrist come from Turkey? Yes. Or he could be a guy named Nikolai. He could be a guy named Nikolai who is designed to go down so that the real Antichrist could rise. Who knows? Who knows? Again, I'm just speculating here. I'm not really super invested in whether or not this guy's the Antichrist. All I know is his name is Nikolai, and that is awesome. That is just awesome to anyone who grew up in the 90s. Now, with that being said, we want to look at the map of what it was like in the time of Christ and compare it to what's going on right now, because I believe the world is kind of resetting to something like Pax Romana, which is what it was in the time of Christ, and that is the context in which the Antichrist rises, okay? Now, this was the world of Eurasia in the time of Christ, okay? This is roughly 30 BC, so this would be in Christ's parents' day, essentially. The Tibetans are up here. They're not really a people called Tibet, but they are a independent or a distinct culture of people. They are Buddhist. The Han Chinese really dominate Lower China, because remember, this is all Himalayas up here. The Xiongnu, you see the Great Wall of China, that's who they're largely blocking out, which seems to be the Huns. So the Huns seem to be descended from Gog Magog, okay? And they were called Xiongnu, okay? One of the ways you would say Gog is Zhong, okay? So the Xiongnu could be just the people of Gog to them, okay? That's how they say it. Gogoryu was right here, and you see Ryu right here. This was a kingdom called Gogoryu. It's ebbed and flowed in terms of size. It used to incorporate all of Manchuria, but I believe by this time it was much smaller. And you have the kingdom of the Three Scyllas in North Korea. Japan's being populated. The Scythians, this would be the House of Togarmah, during that era, were, as you see, all the way over to Ukraine, almost as far as what would be considered. So this is the Dnieper River. This is pretty much all of Ukraine. This is southern Russia. These are the stand countries. So you see that whole block is pretty much Turkish. The Slavs are up here, and the Slavs are going to produce the Muscovites and also the Poles and other Slavic people as far as Czechoslovakia and stuff like this, okay? So you could argue that Meshech or the Muscovites is the forefather of the Slavs. Togarmah is the forefather of the Scythians or the Rus. They were one of the sons of Gomer, which is the Sumerians, and the Sumerians are also right here. That's where they get all the horses from. The Sumerians are the first people to use cavalry, and the sons of Gomer were Togarmah, Ashkenaz, which becomes the Germanic people over here, and then Riphath, which the Riphean mountains are, I believe, over here, the Urals. I think they're over here. So the Uralic, Finno-Uralic languages could be Riphath. And those could be Russians, and then they're going to come down river and become the Kievan Rus. That's one of their main kingdom tribes. Also in Ezekiel's day, there was a king Rusha who ruled over Urartu, which was basically Armenia. And all this stuff is going to kind of be loose confederacies. These are not going to be big empires or nations necessarily. They're more like cultures. The main empires are going to be the Han Chinese, the Arcacid or the Parthian Empire, the Arcacid dynasty. And then you're going to have like different Scythian and Indo-Greek peoples ruling different city-states. And here the Mauryan Empire has fallen apart by that time. So the main consecutive or connected empires are going to be the Han Chinese, the Parthians, and then the Romans. Those are the main ones. The rest of them these are basically tribal groups. You have the Britons and the Celts here. These are all Gaelic or Celtic people. And the Romans have subjugated or purged most of them out of their areas. The Germans are kind of their front line on the Rhine. The Dacians, I forget who they're related to. I want to say they actually might be Thracian people, I think. That would actually make a lot of sense to me. And then they're going to control half of Turkey. The Nabateans over here are sons of Ishmael, so they're basically Arabs. Saba down here, that's the Sabaeans. They're mentioned in Joel 3. This is where the Houthis are right now. And so you see the map kind of devolving kind of to what it was at that time. Notice the Russian Empire the Roman Empire has Egypt, and then you have Kush, which is where southern Sudan is. You have Aksum, where Ethiopia is, okay? So these are your black Africans, if you will. You see your Somalians over here, and then the Nat culture, the Western Sahel culture, the Sao civilization. These are more Bantu, or what I believe are Puntite peoples who would have originally been over here and migrated over here. I don't know who the Grammarites are, but you have a bunch of different Indian tribes that are descendants of Kushites and Canaanites and guys like that, and then invaded by Indo-Aryans and then Greeks and Parthians and Persians and stuff like this. But your main kingdoms are going to be basically this Parthian kingdom, this Han kingdom, which is going to actually have economic weight over as far as these Jongu and this stuff over here, and then the Roman Empire. Those are the main three. And so what I see this being is breaking down to become the kings of the East versus a revived Roman Empire in the last days, which would make Turkey a linchpin for that. But very much, this Nikolai guy could be somebody worth watching. I'm not going to predict. I'm just going to say it's awesome that his name is Nikolai, and he's worth watching. Okay? So you're going to look for Russia basically figuring out how to settle the Ukraine thing. Because we're making aggressive moves, we and Israel are making super aggressive moves with Iran, with Venezuela, talking about getting Greenland one way or the other, talking about Cuba's next, talking about helping the people of Iran, okay? This is all stuff that is very much in China and Russia's backyard and sphere of interest. We and Israel want to seem to replace the Ayatollahs with the son of the Shah, which it seems like we're at least generating on the internet the appearance of popular support for this guy. I don't know if it's true, okay? I don't know if that's boots on the ground true. I do have an old neighbor from Iran. I should ask him what he thinks. I think I will. And I'll let you guys know next time I'm on with John. But, you know, what you see is conflicting interests between the Russians, the Chinese, the Turkeys, Israel, America, over what's going on in Iran here. Turkey does not want a pro-Israel government in Iran because they're pulling weight over here. And again, they want to be the people that Israel and NATO need more than anybody. And Iran being a threat to the Middle East makes them much more necessary to the Middle East and NATO. Okay? If Iran is all of a sudden friendly to the West, Turkey is going to be much more take it or leave it in terms of how the Arabs and Israel and NATO and the EU are dealing with them. Because they'll have Iran here. And be like, Russia's never getting warm water ports, and if they could control Iran and have a friendly government here and in Azerbaijan, Turkey's never going to have their Turkestan. Russia's never going to have what they want. Checkmate. Checkmate world. It's all about just helping out, you know, again, balanced power between India and Pakistan. Everybody's working together against China, Russia, and Turkey. Forever. Screw you guys. And then they all become kings of the East, which is why Turkey, again, wants to be this linchpin. So look for these guys to link up. Look for them once they do link up. You're going to see Turkey probably have some kind of jihad where they pull in people from Afghanistan, probably these other stand countries, and then Iraq to say, join the revolution and stop the West from overthrowing Iran. Because if they overthrow Iran, that is checkmate for the Islamic Revolution. So look for them being the last stand of the Islamic Revolution, and then look for Russia, North Korea, probably Chinese mercenaries, probably not China directly. And then these stand countries in Iran now all being unified against the interests of Israel in the West, and Israel would be seen as trying to overthrow Iran. So now they're like, let's go get Israel. They come in and they take Iraq. They take all our bases and stuff in Iraq that we got. Turkey very much locks down their country and tries to hold what they have in Syria. And you're probably going to see Syria and Turkey really much lock arms together in this thing. Western Iraq is mostly desert, so you're not going to see a whole lot of action there, except probably right on the Euphrates border. And what you're probably going to see is UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, probably to lesser degrees Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey all come together here to guard the west of Iraq. And then, like I said, when the earthquake happens, this whole border is going to be flooded. But before that, you're going to see a massive pouring in through Syria to probably reinstall Assad or something like that. And then these guys gather up in Damascus for this invasion of Israel, which is part of a big Islamic design. I don't think this is going to be Turkey. I think it's going to be Russia and Iran. Could Turkey be a part of it? It's possible. But again, Turkey has too many conflicting interests with Iran and Russia to throw off NATO. And that's what they would do if they went against Israel and Saudi Arabia, because this is ultimately about taking out Israel and then going after controlling Saudi Arabian oil. They would overthrow the Saudi princes in a heartbeat. These people have only existed in power for a century. They were basically puppets of the West. It would be very easy to overthrow these guys because they've already been overthrowing each other to consolidate power. So you just overthrow them and be like, we're just going to break this up into a bunch of tribal regions while we control the main resources, and we play these guys off against each other to fight endlessly like we've been doing in Yemen. Russia loves doing stuff like that, and so does Iran. Okay? And then we get the resources and we control it, or there's oil here, but it's not stable oil. The stable oil comes from Russia, Iran, and the stand countries in Ukraine, which Russia would control by that time. And then Europe has to buy oil from them, and that's the balance of power. Russia controls the oil resources they need. They don't invade these guys, but they ensure that these people are buying oil from them, and they're militarily always stronger. That's the point, okay? I don't think Russia has plans to invade Europe. I don't think they ever did. Everything Russia has been doing is in the defensive at this point, and as long as these guys need Russia and North Korea, you can have, look at this breakup would ensure that you never have one big Islamic group that gets together, and Russia doesn't want that either. And Europe would be happy with that. Everybody would be happy with it except for China and America, who get boxed out. And this is why the New World Order in China and in Europe and all these guys would be all for Russia and America nuking each other. And that's why you're probably going to see when these guys gather in Damascus and start to come into Israel through the Golan Heights. Remember, the Golan Heights is technically part of Syria, but the U.S. recognizes it as part of Israel now. They start to take this. It's here where they're probably going to nuke Damascus and use like a neutron bomb over here. That's how I would expect the Gog-Magog war, and that I would expect that to expand out into a nuclear exchange between the U.S. and Russia. Possibly something going down with North Korea, nuclear, but like maybe nuking Pyongyang, but I don't know what I expect to happen, because the Bible says 5 out of 6 North Koreans soldiers are going to be dying in the mountains of Israel. That would make it really easy for South Korea, allied with Japan. And I think they're already maneuvering for this, because South Korea is recognizing China's sovereignty over Taiwan. I would expect something like saying, in a post-American world, there's no reason why Korea and China can't get along. So South Korea takes over North Korea with the help of Japan. They're a buffer between China and Japan, which they both would want, because South Korea, because of America, is friendlier with Japan. But remember, Japan took over both South Korea and part of America. So South Korea as a potential ally with China against Japan, or a potential ally of Japan against China, actually would work out for all three parties good. So South Korea telling China that it's okay that you take Taiwan, which is effectively what they're saying, is probably a pre-programmed exchange for them eventually taking over North Korea. So I could see South Korea and China overthrowing North Korea with their armies largely weakened in the Middle East, and nobody liking the Kim dynasty, and also them saying, hey, we're going to flood you with technology and food, so it's going to be great for everybody, but we're going to have one Korea under South Korea again. And don't worry, America's not going to be part of it, and neither will Japan. And China's okay with it too. Don't be surprised if something like that shakes out, where America and Russia have nuked each other. We're not going to nuke each other like these idiots did. What we're going to do is we're going to have a peaceful East Asian co-prosperity peace agreement that says Korea's one, Japan's one, and China's one, and they all have relatively strong economies, and so they trade with each other, and what they're going for now is shares of this, which has been divided. And what they're going to work out is something where it's like Samsung and Japan and their companies and China and their companies all get like, this is China's sphere, this is South Korea's sphere, and this is Japan's sphere, something like that. Because they all have interests in here in Latin America. You're talking cars, you're talking technology, you're talking phones, all this stuff. And these guys agree that they're going to essentially colonize the Western Americas just like Europe did back in the day to buy their crap. And with America divided, you're going to see the whole world agree to this and basically be like, okay, the markets of Asia control the Western U.S., the markets of Europe control the Eastern U.S. We've had some major port cities nuked. The central United States is going to be a redneck Christian nationalist hick zone, but they're going to be poor. There's going to be some select rich that control the oil and the food and stuff like that are going to be rich, but the lion's share of the wealth is going to be pouring out of America towards China. And this block over here is probably going to be controlled by the EU and Britain, and you're going to have some interests that are feeding the Antichrist empire from this side and feeding the kings of the East from this side, and you never see the U.S. rise to power again. We get divided as a punishment for helping divide the land of Israel. That's what I think happens. I think we get divided like Germany got divided after World War II. We get blamed for everything having to do with World War III. They'll blame Putin too, but they're going to be like, it was Trump and Putin trying to have their own new world order, and that turned into a nuclear war because we let these idiots, these megalomaniacal, dumb, blowhard, alpha male idiots try to treat the world in the 21st century like they're freaking Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan. Okay? And we're never going to have this again. This is so stupid. The whole world's like, we're never going to have another Alexander the Great versus Genghis Khan in the world where everybody gets nuked and billions of people die because these stupid a-holes with their charisma and their big plans of empire and we're going to rule the world and be the most dominant country forever ended up blah, blah, blah. And now we got a bunch of nukes being exchanged. So we're getting rid of all the nukes. We're having a one world government. We're going to have spheres of power. We're all going to agree on it. Nobody's going to be happy with it completely, but nobody's going to be nuclear devastated again. We're never going to have this happen again, blah, blah, blah. And it will all be scripted because it was all already planned. And the powers that do this are going to largely blame, remember, the Jews are going to skedaddle to Israel probably before the nukes fall in America. Some of them might get nuked. And so all the Jews are going to be back in Israel. So we need a scapegoat. And because the Jews come out of this unscathed, we're not going to make Israel the scapegoat. We need a scapegoat for the war. We need somebody to be pissed off at. We need a Nuremberg trials. Somebody to blame for all of this so we can throw them in coliseums and watch them all die to satiate everybody's bloodlust for all the injustice that's been done in World War III. And who is that going to be? It's going to be the Christian Zionist, Christian nationalist, Trump-supporting MAGA, those idiots, those evangelicals from America who made Trump great. That's who it's going to be. And because of that, you're going to have Christians persecuted the worldwide, and that is how the gospel will be preached to the ends of the earth, and then the end will come. And that's what's going to lead us into Daniel's 70th week. Okay? Again, this is really easy for me to map out because I don't hold to a pre-trib rapture. I don't hold to a pre-wrath rapture. I don't hold to an Islamic Antichrist. I don't need to put the two witnesses in the second half of Daniel's 70th week. All I need to do is take the stuff that the Bible doesn't say is in Daniel's 70th week and say, there's no reason to believe it's in Daniel's 70th week, and just look at these prophecies logically and look at them next to each other and say, what has to happen first, second, and third, and what's the most logical geopolitically? And because I've studied history and geopolitics, that's what I've done. Again, if you want to know this succinctly, you just need to get this book. It's like 312 pages, you guys. It's like 312 pages. It is not a difficult read if you know your Bible. If you've been watching my channels, it's an even clearer read. But again, you'll read this and you'll go, he really hasn't changed what he's saying, and everything seems to be happening like he says it's going to happen. I mean, everything. The transhuman, the talking to dead people, the sex bots, I don't know if I talk about sex bots, but I definitely talk about transhumanism, and I talk about people talking to dead loved ones as AI ghosts and stuff like that. I tell people where it's going. I tell people where World War III is going, and then I tell people what it's going to look like when the Antichrist takes over. Because it's going to be pretty fast. I mean, the rise of the Antichrist is less than one presidential term in your average country. And then the fall of the Antichrist is less than one presidential term in your country. 7 years is a short time. It's a very short time, and it's really going to be about 6.5 years because it's 360-day periods. So we're looking at a space of time that is roughly 3 congressional cycles. They're 2 years apiece. It's roughly all it is once the Antichrist takes power. And if all this stuff gets prosecuted, and we're in a one-world government by 2029, 2030, then the Antichrist's whole career is done by 2033. All we need for this to happen and Christ to be back by 2033, if he comes back in 2033, is for World War III to be prosecuted between now and 2030, which, do any of you guys doubt that that's going to happen now with all the wars breaking out? I mean, just look how bad it's been since 2021 when Russia invaded Ukraine. Now just look at this year. Holy crap, how many countries are we going to invade, take over, bomb? Trump has already bombed more countries than Obama did in 8 years, this year. And he's telling like 3 different countries, you're next. It's called World War III, you guys. When somebody takes over countries and grabs presidents and claims massive chunks of land and saying ours, and then says you're next to 3 other countries, you're next to Iran, you're next to Cuba. I forget who else he said, but that's called megalomaniacal tyranny that somebody's going to stand up to. And what you're going to see is probably Russia is going to be thrown under the bus to take the lion's share of this. But once that happens, you're going to probably see a deal that was pre-worked out between China and the EU and the Arabs and other people that said we need to take out both of them. We need to divide Russia and the US permanently. Permanently. They need to be taken off their Cold War mountains that have allowed them to turn the whole world into a nuclear madhouse. And this can never happen again. And coincidentally, now we have all the nuclear fuel we need to put up all the nuclear power stations we need to have the AI race for eternity. And what you'll probably have is something like a negotiated settlement between 2 AIs, a Chinese and a Western AI, that says, here's the fairest one world government. Not realizing that this was pre-negotiated, and the AIs, the tech bros behind the AI are the same people running both sides of the AI. Oh, you mean China works with Google? Yup. You mean China works with Facebook and all these guys? Yup. These guys have Chinese versions of their stuff too. Where do you think China's getting all their crap? You think they're just making this stuff up from scratch by themselves? When we invented the computer, we invented the internet, we invented Google, We invented all the social media and China's just copying it, and you think that their version of the AI is going to have a totally different idea with a totally different agenda made by totally different people from scratch? Nope. It's going to be really one thing. It's going to be one thing that is running, it's an AI running a Hegelian grift on the whole world. And it's the image of the beast. And that is going to kill everybody unless Jesus comes back. So that's what I see going down. That's how I see it's going to go down. As far as other people are concerned, these are some things that I want to warn you guys to not get too caught up in on one side or the other. Okay? Left-right politics. We're going to see the left-right politics in America go between you're either a fascist or a Marxist. Pick a side. We don't pick a side. We die. That's the point of rightly dividing. We die for Christ. We don't live for the world. We don't pick a side. There's going to be a lot of exposing the church going on because remember, this is heading towards a worldwide persecution of the church. So what are you going to see? A lot of exposing the church by the church. And don't think of what Laura's doing at Magical Mystery Church or what John's doing with the Christian Nationalist alt-right. You might see some of that brought on board. But what it's going to be is more the PDF files, the people abusing their cult-like power, the fake miracles, the fake gifts, the people who put Trump into power, the Christian nationalists, the Christian Zionists, yada, yada. Remember, Christian nationalists and Christian Zionists are two different teams. So you might see the people who are really in charge of putting Trump into power and causing all this mess throw the other people who are somewhat responsible under the bus to become, the next version of, the Christian culture that joins the kings of the East. Don't be shocked if you see that because you're talking about people who would lie, cheat, and steal to take over churches and institutions. So why would they not lie, cheat, and steal to throw their fellow dispensationalist, Christian Zionist, Christian nationalists under the bus? Because we know from their writings that they hate them. And they've always hated them. We know from their writings that they hate the charismatics. And they've always hated them. We know from their writings that they hate the evangelicals, and they've always hated them. They've always been ousting them from what they want is a Protestant nationalist Catholic Church. So don't be shocked if those people start joining in with it's the Christian Zionists, it's the charismatics with all their, deviancy. It's everybody but the good, clean Calvinists who just happen to have all the business connections and the intelligence community connections that lead to them joining with the kings of the East instead of getting thrown under the bus with the regular Christians. Okay? So this exposing the church stuff is too little, too late. Okay? Be aware of it. And here's what I want to say about this stuff. Praise the Lord for whose eyes it opens, okay? Julie Roy's, the stuff Mike Winger's doing. Praise the Lord for whose eyes it's open, okay? These people need to see the bad behavior among bad pastors, the fake miracles, the fake prophets called out, the sexual deviants like Sean Bowles being called out. But Sean Bowles, you should have known that he was a fraud in 2010. Everyone with an internet connection should have been like, this guy's just reading social media and getting stuff off the internet. I don't know how 15 years of doing this later, Mike Winger's like, I've got the dirt. I've got the receipts. He's reading stuff off. Of course. That's why it's right in my video about the revival will not be televised, Mike Winger, from 8 years ago. It was that obvious 15 years ago that he was reading stuff off the internet. You don't need the receipts. You just need common sense to see a guy reading your old address off a phone is a fraud. Because we've had the internet for 15 years by the time he's done this, and everybody knows their address is on the internet. I don't know how charismatics are so dumb. The bigger conversation needs to be, why are they so dumb? Now, what Mike Winger is doing is waking up some charismatics to the obvious stupidity of the charismania, good. But if you want to know, it's always been demonized. It's always been full of sexual deviants and fraudsters and con artists. It's always been like that. Go read my Rightly Dividing book and figure out where it started. Okay? What Mike Winger is doing is too little too late. When's he going to apologize for platforming Joel Webbon? When are people going to apologize for, oh yeah, it turns out Charlie Kirk was a scripture-twisting Christian nationalist, dominionist, who promoted some of the worst NAR people. When's Mike Winger going to get on that instead of being invited to speak at Turning Point USA? Okay? You're going to see more of the same. You're going to see charismatics calling out cessationists, but not charismatics. You're going to see cessationists calling out charismatics, but not Calvinists, not cessationists. You're going to see more of this, and this is all just creating cannon fodder for the persecution of Christians that's going to happen. Okay? Julie Royce, what she's doing, great, but are you exposing the Christian left? Because you know what all of these guys have in common and who they're not exposing? Post-millennial dominionism. The left has the charitable, greasy grace, seeker-friendly version of post-millennial dominionism, and the right has the dominate, lie, cheat, steal, espionage, and overthrow countries version of post-nationalist Christian dominionism. But what they all have in common is post-millennial Christian dominionism, okay? That is the elephant in the room. That is the biggest chunk of the great apostasy that people need to be aware of. That is what is going to have a bunch of people staring in the face of the Antichrist saying, no, this isn't the Antichrist. I don't know what it is, but it's not the Antichrist. They're not going to believe it. Why? I'm going to tell you why. Because they don't obey Christ in the most basic things. Now listen to this. How do I know? Because 2 Peter tells us what the signs of the end times are, the great apostasy. He says they're going to deny the flood and they're going to deny the signs of Christ coming. That's in 2 Peter. Now let's see. Did he just come up to that because he had a Holy Spirit enema and just all of a sudden thought that? Or was he listening to Jesus when Jesus said, verily I say unto you that he shall make him ruler over all of his goods, if what? If he does this, he's a faithful and wise servant who the Lord makes ruler of his household. He gives them meat in due season. Meat in due season. What does that mean? It means you teach them the things that are relevant for today based on the things you're studying in the Word. You're aware of the things that Satan are coming back against in the Word of God, and you're teaching the Word of God against the things that Satan are coming back. You do this in your own life. When Satan's like, does the Bible really say that fornication's a bad idea? It's a sin in all cases. I mean, that girl is hot and she is rubbing your leg. This is how it works. Yes, the Bible says fornication is a sin. Get behind me, Satan. Listen, I like you and you're pretty, but I'm a Christian. We're not going to have sex before we're married. If you can't handle that, you need to go shake it for someone else. Okay? That's meat in due season in your own personal life. Where is Satan attacking you? What does the Word say? Fight back. Okay? Where is Satan attacking the church right now? Eschatology. He's been doing it for 20 years. It's a tertiary issue. Jesus said it's none of your business. Nobody can understand this. It's too divisive. We're not even going to put eschatology in our church's doctrinal statement. Blessed is the servant whom the Lord finds when he comes, finds him what? Teaching on eschatology, because the Lord's coming. Verily he'll make him ruler over all of his good. But if that, listen to this, evil servant says in his heart, my Lord delays his coming. Do you know what I'm hearing from Christians that I know and trust and know to be in the Word left and right? Let's say Christ comes back 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. They're always saying it. Why? Why? There was never a point in church history where faithful Christians said, maybe Christ will come back 100 or 1,000 years from now. Because he always could come back soon. Soon was the term. And soon is always soon. It's never 100 years or 1,000 years away. You never heard that in church history until the 21st century. What does it say? Listen, that evil servant says in his heart, my Lord delays his coming. He's not going to be here anytime soon. And what does he do? He begins to smite his fellow servants, a.k.a. pastoral abuse, and eat and drink with the drunken, a.k.a. getting wealthy and hanging out with the world. Does that sound like every pastor they're calling out right now? Yes. What are they not calling out, though? They're not giving them meat in their due season. They think the Lord delays his coming. That's why they treat the church like crap, because they treat it like, this is my kingdom, I'm the steward, Gondor is mine, and I don't need to submit to the king because I'm not waiting for the return of the king. That's why they're acting like the steward of Gondor instead of like somebody waiting for the return of the king. So what does he say? The Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looks not for him. When they get to the point where they're like, it's not, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the world. Well, it's not the end times. Why? I'm not looking for that. It's good being the king, says the steward. In an hour that he's not aware of, and he'll cut him asunder and appoint his portion with the hypocrites. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now listen, this is not the first time Jesus says this. This is when he puts it in its proper context when he's explaining eschatology right before he dies to the apostles. This is the Olivet Discourse, okay? He had already covered that in Luke 12. And what he says there is when Peter is asking for the explanation of the parables, the kingdom parables, which lead up to the last of the kingdom parables, is the one with the fish and the dragnet and pulling them all in and throwing out the good, or keeping the good and throwing out the bad, okay? This was a type of the rapture, the gathering of the wheat and the tares. And what does he say? He says, in the context of giving the kingdom parables, he says, and the Lord said, who then is the wise, faithful, and wise steward? See how I'm not just like, oh, this is kind of like the steward of Gondor. No, Jesus said it's kind of like the steward of Gondor. Who his Lord shall make ruler over his household to give them their portion of meat in due season. Again, I put you in charge of my household, manage the servants, but feed the servants. Right? This is what pastors are supposed to do. Feed the sheep, but manage the sheep. Not fleece the flock and eat the sheep. Feed the sheep and manage the sheep. Okay? Blessed is the servant whom his Lord, when he comes, shall find so doing. Of a truth I say to you that he will make him ruler over all he hath. But if that servant say in his heart, my Lord delays his coming, clip this and give it to Mike Winger. Why are they abusing the flock? Because in their hearts they say, my Lord delays its coming. Eschatology is none of my business. I'm not watching for the Lord's coming. I'm being the steward of Gondor. Gondor is mine. And he begins to beat the men servants and the maidens and eat and drink with the drunken, abusing the church, getting rich off them, fleecing the flock, and eating the sheep rather than feeding the sheep. The Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looks not for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him asunder and appoint him a portion with the unbelievers. That guy's going to hell. He has a portion with the unbelievers. But wait, there's more. Wait, there's more. And that servant which knew his Lord's will and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. Who's that talking about? Who is that talking about? Is that people getting greater or lesser punishments in hell? They're all burning forever, okay? There's no torturers in hell. There's nobody assigned to mete out punishment for it. It's just burning forever. Satan and his minions will all have the same lot you will in hell. Okay? But what you do have is what's going to happen. Listen, when Jesus comes back, what's going to happen? Well, that guy's going to hell. But what about the servant who knew his Lord's will? Who is that? That is every Christian who knew you were supposed to watch for the Lord's coming. He's been saying it again and again and again, and he's going to say it in the book of Revelation too. Watch, watch, watch. You knew his will, but you didn't do it. You didn't watch. You're going to be beaten with many stripes. What does that mean? You're going to get your head chopped off for not taking the mark of the beast. But he who did not, who is that? Those are the Jews that are blinded. Remember, this is a Jewish audience he's talking to. Some of them see, but some of them are going to be born to the people who don't see. They don't know you're supposed to be watching for the Lord's coming. These ones, these Jews in the last days, are going to look upon him whom he's pierced and mourn. They're going to get it right then. They're going to be beaten with few. What's it going to be like for them? Oh, they have to go hide in the wilderness, and they have to be tested in their faith during that time. But what they're not going to get is their heads chopped off for not taking the mark of the beast. This is the Christians that are left behind. These are the Jews that are left behind. For unto whomever is given, remember the Christians are given the New Testament and the Holy Spirit, of him much will be required. You are expected to obey and watch, because the Holy Spirit in you and the Word of God in your pocket is telling you to watch. But the Jews who just have the Old Testament and don't have the teachings of Christ and the apostles, that tell them what the great apostasy is going to look like, that tell them that they're going to reject end times teaching, that tell them that they're going to get into old earth theory, that tell them that they're going to eat and drink with the drunken and be more concerned with the world and get lukewarm and all this other crap while denying the signs of the Lord's coming, they don't have that. They just have the Old Testament. Well, they're going to be, even though they deserved much, they're going to be beaten with little. The Christians who knew the Lord's will, they knew the Lord's will. They knew the Lord's will. How do you know they knew the Lord's will? Because they knew that Jesus was the Lord. See? The ones who didn't know the Lord's will didn't know that Jesus was the Lord, so they weren't attentive to him and his servants, what they said. God's not going to hold those Jews in the last days accountable for knowing everything the apostles taught. He's going to hold the church accountable. The Jews are going to look upon whom they pierced, and they're going to mourn, and then he's going to save some of them. And he says, I come to send fire on the earth. What I will if it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with. How I am straitened is till it's all accomplished. Suppose ye that I'm come to give peace on the earth? I say nay, but rather division. Why is he saying this right after the guys who eat and drink with the drunken? I didn't come to bring peace, but division. Why is he saying this? What do you think the deception's going to be? What is the deception always? Why do you say peace when there is no peace? Why do you think there's going to be a worldwide revival and world peace in the last days with everyone being Christianized when Jesus told you the opposite of that? And why do you think it's just a secondary issue to call these people brothers, and they're my brother in the Lord, and I love them, but I disagree with them about this one little tertiary issue where they're saying the polar opposite of what Jesus said? We lose down here. They're saying the polar opposite of what Jesus says, but that's just a tertiary issue. And then you find out they're saying the polar opposite of what the Apostle Paul said about the gifts. They're saying the polar opposite of what Peter said about flood denial in the old earth. They're saying the polar opposite of what the apostles said on every point. But those are all just secondary and tertiary issues. Who told you that? Well, they did. They told me they're secondary and tertiary issues. And they told me the primary issues are what are in the Catholic Ecumenical Councils and the Presbyterian Creed. Maybe you should listen to the apostles tell you what's important rather than the Presbyterians, who've been hanging out with Freemasons and overthrowing up governments from the beginning. There's a thought for you. The apostles or the Freemason spy collaborators? The apostles or the people who chop off their king's head? The apostles or the people who started the American Revolution and CIA and all the crap and are in bed with the Mormons and every other person that's evil in America now? The apostles are the people who lie to take over your churches and your evangelical institutions. The apostles. We listen to the apostles. Okay? And yes, there's going to be division for this. You know why you can't have Christian nationalism? Do you want to know why you can't have Christian nationalism? Because Jesus didn't come to bring peace, but division. And he's not talking about division just between America and the Muslims. He's talking about, for henceforth there will be 5 in one household divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. So if he's dividing households between those who love him and those who don't, how can you have a Christian nation? How can you have a Christian nation if Jesus came to divide households between who follows him and who doesn't? That precludes the Christian nation, because nations are families of households. Father shall be divided against son, and son against father, and mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. You know what? It's an extremely rare family where everybody is a true born-again Christian. It is an extremely rare thing. I don't know if I've ever seen it. So how can you have a Christian nation if you can't have a Christian family? He came to divide you from Adam and order up a new family based on Christ. And it just so happens most families have at least a couple of people, even if they're raised in the church, that want nothing to do with Christ. People get divorced over it. Kids stop talking to their parents over it. And yes, they will put you to death for it. That's what he told you. You can't have a Christian nation. So is this a secondary issue or is this a primary issue that Christ told us you can't have a Christian family, so you can't have a Christian nation? There's going to be a great apostasy in the last days, not a great revival. And if they're saying it's a great revival and pointing to it and saying this is a revival, when all these people are saying, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I think it's fine to be gay and you should be able to sleep with whoever you want, and I look at porn. They're lying to you. They're not Christians. They're Christian nationalists. And what is that? It's a nationalist that uses the Lord's name in vain. That's what that is. Lord of that servant will cut him asunder and point his thing with the unbelieving. Now listen to this. Listen to this. This is in Luke 12 when he says this. Father-in-law against mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, right? And he says, and he also said to the people, now listen in his own day, okay? This is what he's saying to the Jews in his own day. This is why he's saying it right after talking about the people giving meat in due season, okay? And he said to the people, when you see a cloud rise out of the west, straight away you see there comes a shower, and there it is. And when you see the south wind blow, he says, there will be heat, and it comes to pass. You hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it that you cannot discern this time? You had all the prophecies to know that Christ's first coming was here, and you wouldn't watch. You have all the prophecies to know that Christ's second coming is near, and you won't watch. Yea, why even of yourselves do you judge not what is right? Don't let Al Mohler tell us what's a primary and secondary issue. Don't let Rick Warren tell us what's our business. They're not even honest men. They were out to infiltrate and take over your churches. One with leftist, seeker-friendly church takeover, and the other with rightist, Calvinist takeover. They're a couple of infiltrators. One's a Christian nationalist, one's a Christian globalist. Or really a pluralistic New Age globalist. Don't you see how they seem to be against each other, but they both have something in common? Whenever you see two people who are against each other, but they both have something in common, you need to look at that thing and be like, that's the thing that Satan's trying to deceive me with. Or just be in the habit of knowing Scripture and comparing what people say to Scripture, and be in the habit of saying, I'm on neither of your side, I'm on the Lord's side. You're both wrong. That's the whole point of rightly dividing. Read the book. Just read the image and read the first scriptural excerpt on the opening. Why did I put that there? With the angel of the Lord, he says, whose side are you on? Our side or our enemy's side? He says, neither. I am on the Lord's side. I ain't part of your conflict. Now, God's got purposes to do with Israel, just like he did back then. But what did the angel of the Lord say who was going to help them take over Israel? He's like, I ain't on your side. He said, I'm not on the side of ethnic Israel. I'm on the side of the Lord. And the Lord is doing something with ethnic Israel. I'm not against ethnic Israel either. So you pay attention to these things, okay? It's purifying the church stuff. Purify your own camp. You know what? Remnant Radio is doing a great job of this, okay? Do I agree with them on all things? No, I don't. But they're charismatics critiquing charismatics. See how that should work? Look at your own life. After that, your own family. After that, your own denomination and church. Don't look at the people who are... And Mike Winger's doing a good job too. He's a charismatic critiquing charismatics, okay? But where are the Calvinists critiquing Calvinists? Where are the Baptists critiquing Baptists? They're silenced. That's where they are, okay? Don't listen to listen to cessationists who do nothing but critique charismatics, but don't ever talk about the problems in the Baptist church or in the Calvinist church. I realize those channels will have a lot of useful information if you're inclined to gobble up anything that's critical of any churches. But notice they never say anything about the Calvinists or the Christian nationalists. Pay attention to that. Don't be deceived by them, okay? Same thing with easy believism versus Calvinism, okay? Pay attention to the greasy grace guys and the seeker-friendly guys, as well as the Calvinists, and realize who are they critiquing and who are they never critiquing. Don't listen to leftist propaganda because you're concerned about Trump and the MAGA right, okay? Make sure you're not falling for their side, the blue side of the deception, just because you're keen to the red side of the deception. There's two sides. There's two wings on the dirty bird. That's why the vessel with wickedness in Zechariah has two wicked stork women carrying it. There's two sides to the dirty bird, okay? We're for Christ. We're not for this world. We're not pro-Israel. We're not anti-Israel. We are, God is going to fulfill all his purposes related to the people, the land, and the third of Israel that he is going to open their eyes in the last days to see Christ and repent. We know this. It's in Zechariah. We know this. We know the land is going to be divided because that is in Daniel and Joel. We don't allegorize that away, nor do we become Christian Zionists because we think God needs our help for it to come to pass. We acknowledge what God says he's going to do. Are you for Israel or against Israel? We say neither. I'm on the Lord's side. But the Lord did say this was going to happen in Israel, and maybe you should listen because it also says Jesus is Messiah. See? And it's those Jews that will listen to those Old Testament scriptures and not just bend them to twist whatever they want that will also ultimately come to Christ. So we need to pray for their eyes to be open. We need to evangelize them. And we need to bless them as they persecute us. As they're putting us to death. Some of that is in synagogues. We need to pray for the Jews to be saved. So we're not pro-Israel. We're not anti-Israel because we also need to bless everybody. Those who bless you are blessed. Well, no, my Bible says if I don't bless my enemy, pray for those who persecute me, and forgive those who've wronged me, I'm going to be put under tormentors. So yes, that includes Israel, but it also includes everybody. God bless America and everybody else. See? That's being a Christian. Christian nationalism versus secularism. Don't get into the leftist. Remember, they're both going to persecute evangelicals in the end. They're both amillennial, postmillennial dominionists. If they're professing Christian, and they're both secular humanists of a form, if they're not. They're all going to persecute Christians. We are not on either of these sides, okay? Now, Trump's Board of Peace. I'm just going to say this quickly. I don't think it's the 10 Kings, but it might evolve into that. If it does, I expect it to be in a post-American world. They're not going to let Trump continue to control it after he's out of office. I don't buy that. I just don't. I don't think he's persuasive enough. I think a lot of people are kissing his butt because he has the American majority under his thumb right now. But he's losing that majority here in America. His ratings are going down. He is not making the economy better. There are a select few people who are reaping the whirlwind. Because let's face it, when inflation happens, hyperinflation happens, which is going to happen in the Black Horse, certain people who have assets all paid for, and I'm talking about things like cars and equipment and houses and farms, they're going to do great. And a lot of those people are conservative. So a lot of conservative Christians are going to be like, I love Trump. I'm doing great. He's taking care of the Christians. And not realizing you just happen to be blessed and fortunate to have your assets paid off when they all hyperinflated. Or been in a mortgage that they couldn't just raise your interest rate and raise your mortgage when hyperinflation happened. But you could raise the prices on the work you're doing. So be humble if you're on the side who's, kind of being taken care of financially. I'm super blessed to be debt-free. I don't make a lot of money, but I'm debt-free. When you're debt-free, they can 10x the price of food. And basically what I'm going to have to boil down to is I can never go out to eat. I can barely drive anywhere. If I get the same amount of donations and everything I'm getting, plus Airbnb stays that I'm getting, then I can buy food, and that's it. For just me, and that's it. That's if they 10x the price of food. I'm waiting for that. I've been waiting for that. That's why I live frugally, okay? But I don't think this stuff, again, I just don't think it's going to be Trump, you guys. I just don't feel that way. I think he's doing a lot of stuff that seems like he's the Antichrist because that's what it's meant to look like. I'm still maintaining that position as my opinion, okay? Finally, this technocratic union, they're calling it Pax Silica. Look into this and pay attention to this. It's basically an anti-China AI block full of Trump sycophants, okay? Just like the Board of Peace. I would look at this and say this is probably something that's going to continue in a form, but the power base is going to be transferred at least away from America, probably away from Trump as well, but probably in the hands of Jared Kushner and the tech bros that have been working under Trump. You're probably going to see the more Christian nationalist of them, the more neocon of them being thrown under the bus with the Dispies and the Futurists, and then the chameleon left tech bros probably plying their trade in the Middle East and Europe after America falls. That's what I would expect. So that's it. That's all I got. Again, you guys are welcome to take these videos that I produce, because they're always going to be in the playlist on Eschatological Apologetics, and keep tagging new stuff on them as you guys are finding new information, and I'll be sure to keep abreast of that and research that for the next one. But I'm going to keep trying to do one of these maybe 3-4 times a year at the most, because there's going to be a lot happening, but it's not going to be a lot of new information and content for me. It's just going to be me reporting on the same stuff a bunch of people are reporting on. I would rather have you guys bring that stuff to my attention and me process that and be like, okay, well, this might be a little bit more like this or that, but it's still heading in the same basic trajectory. I think keep calm and honey badger on is probably the better solution for you guys. Be prepared to die. Be prepared to be poor. Be prepared to be persecuted. Keep spreading the gospel. Just don't get caught up in the winds and the waves roaring. Remember, men's hearts are going to fail them for fear on what's coming on the earth. People are going to be turned against each other in the body of Christ, okay? Make sure you're not saying it's them. Make sure you're sitting here going, my sin, my sin, my sin, my sin. Purify me, Lord, purify me. Show me where I can change. Show me where I can be more gracious, more humble, more discerning, more wise, so that I can see to remove the speck from somebody's eye in a way that's like, I want you to see, I want you to see, I want you to see. But you need humble grace. You need humble grace, humble grace, humble grace, humble grace. Because when it comes down to the persecution, your testimony should not be, why, this is unfair, God, rain justice on our enemies. It will be, forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. Because by the time they're done with this persecution, that's going to be pretty much it for the Gentiles coming to faith, I believe. And so your heart and your attitude should be like, forgive them for killing me. Forgive them for killing me. Because remember, as much as it's going to feel like necessary justice when it's happening, especially if it's happening to the ones you love, the heart of God and your perfection is going to be you saying, one more, just save one more, Lord, just save one more. If my life brings one more into the kingdom of God, let it be. Because that is your perfection. That's the heart of God in you. Okay? So that's the goal we're going for. And so start practicing now. Focus on yourself and where you might be at fault, where you need to humble yourself, where you need to grow, where you need to mature, maybe where you need to apologize, maybe where you need to make peace and reconciliation. And then when it comes to being discernment and telling people, hey, give them meat in due season, make sure that that's not smeared over by your own pride, your own anger, frustration, and stuff like this. And this is me preaching the choir. This is my battle. How can I be a more effective communicator to the truth? Because it's easy to be self-righteous and frustrated and impatient when everybody's not speaking the truth. I mean, there are not many giving them meat in due season. I consider a lot of the stuff about, exposing cover-ups in the church and teaching grace and humility and leading people to Christ, anywhere where this is happening, even if it's a teacher that I disagree with on major points, I'm going to still praise the Lord. I'm not going to seek for their fall if they are producing any good fruit for the Lord. But I need to look at myself and go, okay, if you are one of the few who are ringing the eschatological bell and keeping the light on, how is the rest of your testimony? Because if it's not being received because you're saying inappropriate things in the context of thinking you're being funny or because you're angry and frustrated, anybody who doesn't listen because of my failing, that's on me too. Okay, and so that's just as important as those guys adding the eschatology is me adding the humility and grace. So if that's you, if you share that in common with me, then work on it. Keep working on it. Keep asking God to help you work on it, okay? Work on your eyes, your tongue, your actions, right? Just work on your posture. When people see you, do they see somebody who's like, that guy knows Jesus? Or do they see that person and say, that guy knows information? Right? You want that to beam out of you so that when you give them harsh truth, they know it's coming from a person who loves you like Jesus does. So I hope that helps. I hope that encourages you guys. I hope you're blessed by this. And we will be back on Matthew. I'll try to do the next section of Matthew later on this week. And you guys have a great rest of your week. Till then, Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.